All right, good afternoon. I am calling this work session to order. Today is January 10th, 2023. I would like to provide notice that the City Council has the ability to recess into executive session for legal advice if needed. City Clerk, can we please have roll call?
Mayor Daggett.
Here.
Vice Mayor Aslan.
Here.
Councilmember Harris. Councilmember House.
Here.
Councilmember Matthews. Here. Councilmember McCarthy.
I'm here.
Councilmember Sweet.
Here. Thank you. Councilmember Matthews, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Please stand if you're able to.
Councilmember Harris, our mission statement.
The Flagstaff City mission is to protect and enhance the quality of life for all.
Thank you. Vice Mayor, would you read our land acknowledgement?
Absolutely. The Flagstaff City Council humbly acknowledges the ancestral homelands of this area's indigenous nations and original stewards. These lands, still inhabited by native descendants, border mountains sacred to indigenous peoples. We honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their continued contributions. We celebrate their past, present, and future generations who will forever know this place as home.
Thank you. A review of our draft agenda for the January 17th City Council meeting.
Mayor, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
We do have a call for public comment.
I apologize. We have a public commenter online.
Thank you, Mayor. We have Laura Rosensweet. Laura, you can go ahead and give your comments now.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? I just wanted to make sure.
Yes.
I think that was yes. Okay. Thank you so much for these couple of minutes, Mayor and City Council members. My name is Laura Rosensweet, and I'm with Education Forward Arizona, which is a statewide, nonpartisan, nonprofit education organization. And I just wanted to give a little reminder of who we are and then talk about how the city of Flagstaff was previously involved with our organization. So in 2016 and 2017, the city of Flagstaff endorsed what's called the Education Progress Meter, which was a statewide effort to set some goals around education in the state of Arizona. So back then, our organization was actually called Expect More Arizona. But recently, within the past year and a half, Expect More Arizona came together with two other organizations to form Education Forward Arizona. So you may previously have heard of Expect More Arizona. We're now Education Forward Arizona, all the same thing. But we have recently done more work on the Education Progress Meter, and all of this information is on our website. You'll also see that the city of Flagstaff was listed as a supporter and endorser of the Education Progress Meter. And the Education Progress Meter was a series of 8 indicators that set some goals around education in the state of Arizona, with the ultimate goal of working towards the state's overall attainment goal of 60%. And just to give some context to that term attainment, the way that we define attainment is any adult age 24 to 64 who has gone on to get additional education past high school. That does not have to be a 4-year degree, but it includes 4-year degrees. So it could be a certificate, industry credential, a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree. All of that fits into attainment. So the Education Progress Meter is the series of steps that leads up to the state's overall attainment goal of 60%. Just to give you context, we're at 46% attainment, and we're trying to get to 60% by the year 2030. So last year in 2022, we spent time around the state getting updates to the progress meter because it had been about 6 years since it was revisited. And so I was hoping that maybe over the series of a couple meetings, just to bring you some of those updates during this virtual or in-person public comment period, just to keep the city apprised because they previously were a supporter of the Education Progress Meter. And we would hope the city would be interested in continuing that. So I just wanted to give a little bit of information and just provide a little bit of context. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now we have the review of the draft agenda for January 17th. Does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, we will move on to the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. For the benefit of the newly elected officials, we do these reports about twice a month. They coincide with regular work sessions, and they are intended to be informational, usually touching on things that are happening behind the scenes. We do also append to these reports, and such is the case today, monthly updates by some of the divisions, and we'll invite them to come up and present to you. We try to keep this report and the monthly updates succinct but meaningful. So it's an informational thing and one intended for you and the community to better understand what we're doing as there's a lot going on. This report does go back several weeks because of the holidays and a number of other things. There's some information here that's a bit dated, but I think meaningful nevertheless. So bear with me as I touch on things that have happened over the last several weeks. I'll start by keeping my finger on the button here. So my mic stays, oh, you're going to, thank you, tag team. Thank you, Sterling. I'll start by noting that we had a retirement by a very special employee, Debbie Valencia with Water Services, who had been with the organization for 25 years. She retired last month. We're so happy for her, and her great contributions to the city and to the community are greatly appreciated. On to the fire department. We mentioned this previously, but back in November, we had 10 Flagstaff firefighters graduate from our academy, and it was a wonderful ceremony, the pinning of the badge ceremony. I took the liberty of including a lot of photos for you. It was a great event. It was a packed house here, thanks to those who attended. Moving on, I take note in the fire department also an update on some new gates installed by Wildland Fire Management in the Dry Hills area and staging for some log decks and slash piles there. There's a lot going on. You will receive a report from our Wildland Fire crew I think that's coming up at the next meeting. It's coming to you quickly. And I know we'll be calling out an item to talk about here shortly that has some relevance to the Dry Lakes area. So I'll circle back on that in just a second. Also with Wildland Fire Management to note, and I'm just highlighting a few things. There's a lot more in the report. I'm just touching on some things. Funding source for $5,000 to purchase the HEPA filters for homes. These are very important these days from a resiliency standpoint, as they provide a means for those who may have some heightened risk during periods of smoky air, which now is becoming a regular occurrence, of course. So it's a great program, and glad to see additional funding going into that. Moving on to police department. There's a lot of things to note there, but I want to call a couple out for you. One is 8 recruits who graduated from the Maricopa County Law Enforcement Training Academy. Please take note, we will soon be seeing our graduates from our own academy here in Flagstaff at the Coconino Community College. Very excited for that to happen. And some nice photographs of the new recruits. I wanted to mention a life-saving event that occurred and give some awards or recognition here, rather, to emergency communications specialist, Allison Dean, who provided emergency medical instructions to a female who was not able to awaken her 70-year-old spouse. Ms. Dean provided CPR instructions to the female while the paramedics were dispatched and did so successfully. So the individual has survived, and that's just a wonderful success story. So congratulations and big props to Specialist Allison Dean. On to Public Works. I make mention of this because I know Vice Mayor Aslan has a particular interest in this. Well, we all do, but this will be something he wants to hear, and that is that our street lighting received their first big order of the dark sky compliant LED neighborhood lights. These have been back ordered for some time. I know it's been a real struggle to get these in our inventory, so 15 of them have been installed, and that's just great news. Stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have a lot more to report on that. During the holiday season, I'm just going to touch on some things briefly. I know the holiday season's well past us at this point, but we had a wonderful lunch for our seniors on December 15th. Many of you participated in that. Thank you. It was great. Thanks, and that was at the Joe Montoya Center. Thanks for all who were involved in that great event. Also this year, something great happened. We've always had the lighting of the menorah here in City Hall, but this year we now have an outside display of the new menorah as purchased by the city. You have a nice photograph there. It was part of the celebration that occurred during Hanukkah, and what a great thing that we now have such an inclusive holiday season. And I want to give props out to our parks crew and to the legal team for all the work that went behind this. This was the first year for the outside menorah, and I think it was a great success. You also have some photos on the other festivities downtown. Big crowds this year. I think we can attribute that to post-COVID and just things in general, but the Santa Claus event, the lighting of the tree, the New Year's Eve event were all well attended, and there's some pretty impressive photographs for you to enjoy. Back to the item I wanted to call out, and I do this from time to time in these manager reports. It's not a formal action, but it's something that is intentionally slated to garner some discussion by you and some direction, typically. And these are things that don't fall neatly within other parts of the agenda, and these are things we can oftentimes insert fairly quickly, and such was the case here. The topic is the outfitter guide permits as issued by the Flagstaff Ranger District, and there's currently a prospectus for outfitter guide services. I think a total of several permits that may be issued here, and I gave you the link for this in my report. I have accessed the link, and it's pretty informative. But the proposal involves a potential 7 outfitter permits and guiding permits for recreational purposes, which in and of itself is not newsworthy. But what is of interest is that the areas that could be included in this may include the Mount Eldon and Dry Lakes area immediately north of Flagstaff. And of course, anything that concerns these regions right now is of interest to the city because of the burns and the post-burn flooding that has occurred and the mitigation efforts that are underway and all the efforts, frankly, to address and mitigate the impact that has occurred in our forest directly adjoining the city. I think that's about all I can preface this with, other than noting that the county, to my understanding, is submitting a letter in opposition of these permits being issued because of the flood mitigation efforts, and I think also because of at least an asserted lack of law enforcement in these areas and the risks associated with this area that are now heightened because of the recent wildfires. With that, Mayor, I'll turn it back to you to guide a discussion, and we'd be glad to hear whatever outcomes you may want to entertain and whatever direction you may want to give us.
Thank you. I do have a suggested direction, but first I want to see whether anyone has any questions. Yes, please, Councilmember House.
Thank you, Mayor. Not necessarily a question, but I did appreciate getting the information on the prospectus. And the only thing that I really noticed in it that did give me some pause was that there was no real reference that I saw to the impacts of wildfire and flood mitigation. There's a section that talks about, I don't think they called it mitigation measures or special considerations was the section. And I was kind of surprised by the fact that that wasn't included as part of their consideration for this. So I'm curious to see how other members of council felt about it, but that just raised some concern for me.
Thank you. No other comments or questions? Oh, Councilmember McCarthy?
Well, thank you, Mayor. I guess I have two concerns. The one about fire has already been discussed, and I agree with that. My other concern is that I don't think motorized recreation is appropriate for that area. And I'm familiar with the area, and I just would not be happy to see motorized recreation added in those areas. Thank you.
Thank you. So what I would like to see is for the city to follow suit as the county did and draft up our concerns about this proposal, including lack of law enforcement, hazards around fire and flooding, as well as Councilmember McCarthy's concerns, and send it by the deadline, which is January 15th. Yes, please.
Yeah, just to add a voice to Councilmember McCarthy's concerns, I wonder if motorized recreation is already permitted out there, but to the extent that it's not, I don't think we should be supportive of adding that to the mix. That doesn't preclude other kinds of outfitting and guiding activities out there. So want to be as amenable as possible to the goals of what's at stake here, while also echoing Councilmember McCarthy's voice just to bring another head to the direction you're being given.
Thank you. Neil?
Yeah, just wanted to provide a little clarity.
Your mic's not on.
There you go. Okay, how about? Red is, okay, red is good. Sorry, I thought there was a different. So the motorized stuff is exactly where my mind went when I saw this. I checked in with the Forest Service. This is only for vans and SUVs. There's no ATVs or UTVs that are part of this, which eased some of my concerns. And any sort of existing restrictions, whether it's for a timber project or on-forest restoration project, these permits would be subject to dealing with those closures just like any other people would in the forest. And so if an area is closed for restoration or fire issues or flooding issues, the permits have to apply with those exact same closures. And the existing recreation numbers that they gave me for the vehicle use is they expect about one additional vehicle on a forest road per day based on those user numbers for about 6 months of the year. So it's really not, it's not like pink Jeep tours screaming up and down the roads in Sedona. This would be, a very minimal impact in the forest as far as seeing an increase in commercial use. And so again, they would be subject to the same restrictions and closures as everybody else.
Thank you.
Yep.
My direction would remain the same, that we have concerns that we'd like to see addressed.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Neil, for that information. I'm gathering that we can address the concerns. And am I hearing that council would stop short of opposing the permits, but would rather the Forest Service and the Ranger District be cognizant of our concerns, or is this an outright opposition to issuing permits?
Go ahead.
Just to clarify your question, if we're not talking about off-roading, then I think we're fine if we're sticking to normal road usage and passenger vehicles. I don't have any opposition to that at all.
And the usage, if we could have confirmation from the Forest Service that the usage would be as low as they're indicating, then I think bringing up our concerns would be fine. Councilmember Sweet.
I would support that. Our concerns, as long as they're voiced, I'm good.
I'm seeing heads nod, so I think we have good direction. And because the due date is the 15th, there may be time here to circulate a draft letter to the council for quick edits. And then we will place the letter in a future consent item for ratification. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If I may, Mayor, I'll continue on. There's one more thing I want to mention, and then I'll turn it over to Heidi to start with we have 3 division updates, and we promise that they will be succinct. But I want to remind you of the retreat at the end of next week. This is a 2-day retreat. It's very important on many fronts, not the least of which there's going to be a lot of introductory material provided for our newly elected officials, and frankly, as a refresher for the entire council. Sterling and Stacy and others will be going through many areas of, I won't use the word training, that would be inappropriate, but rather just guidelines to be aware of, overviews, and kind of a primer on some of these topics: the city charter, open meeting law, city council meetings and procedures, which are in place by the city council, and we will roll those out and talk about them. Boards and commissions, public records, conflicts of interest, and land use. In the afternoon, and this is on January 19th, Thursday, we'll get into a little bit of team building and some organizational structure and management strategies. Good stuff. And certainly these are open meetings. They'll be accessible through Teams. And we will conclude that first day with any public participation. And on that first day too, a very important topic on public outreach, where we will talk about media relations and social media directives and so forth. Very important these days. Thank you, Sterling. The following day, we shift into a budget overview, and this is setting the stage for the budget process that follows. It will be high level, but it will be very informative, and you have that agenda in front of you as well. Both agendas are appended or pasted in my report. We're excited. It will be facilitated. We will feed you and provide you with coffee and tea and all the nourishments. These retreats are invaluable. It's a great way for us to dialogue in a rather informal manner and in a site off City Hall. This, by the way, will be at the Public Works facility. We'll send out a reminder of that. But the Public Works facility, which is, does anybody need directions there? Most of you know how to get there. Okay. It's a great facility. So we're looking forward to the venue. We're looking forward to the discussion, and most of all, looking forward to your engagement and participation in this, which is the first retreat for the new council, the first of a few this year. After this one, it will all be budget for some time. Strap in on this and be ready. We'll make it very meaningful for you. Starting out very high level, and as the budget season progresses, we get more and more into the minutia. So it's a pretty good roadmap that we'll be following in that budget process. Heidi, can I turn it over to you and talk about economic vitality?
Yes. Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council members. Heidi Hansen. Currently interim Deputy City Manager, but you all know me as your Economic Vitality Director, which I'll be going back to that position full-time very soon. Wanted to share a little bit about our November month. Again, you receive this all the time from me, and these are just some highlights. I was told I have to stay to 5 minutes. It never happens, so CJ said I could have some of his time. And you'll know why, because once I start talking about the division, you'll see that there is so much that's involved. And what I'm going to show you, I've actually condensed from what's attached. So I'm trying, Greg, I'm trying. But again, for those of you who are new that might not be aware, our division includes the airport, community investment, which has several sections, tourism and visitor services, and the library. So we have over 110 employees in this division, and I can tell you they are actively working on behalf of our community. For the airport, the reason I'm sharing about an airport roundtable conference that the airport director and the airport communications manager went to in November is because with the news that United Airlines has pulled out of our market because of pilot shortages, plane shortages, and crew shortages, we are actively pursuing more airlines. So I just wanted to share with you that we are going to these conferences like we used to, and we are doing our best to try to see if there's other fits for our airport. Actively right now, American Airlines is still with us, flying to Phoenix and Dallas-Fort Worth, and so we're doing a really good job keeping them, and we hope that, cross our fingers, nothing happens with that service. We actively market the airport outward and inward, as well as sell advertising within the terminal to create a revenue source, and Claire Harper, our airport communications manager, works with me to do that. We have a media toolkit, and we're actively selling positions, and we have a slew of other ideas that we're working on to create revenue-producing ideas. Some of these talked about how we wanted them to book their flights early. We don't want people coming to the airport and getting frustrated. We also do a promotion with the downtown and other areas. So we actually were a sponsor to their passport program in downtown, which is always helpful to get the word out about flying Flagstaff first. We also have an in-flight email newsletter that you're welcome to receive. If you aren't on the list, let me know, and we'll have you hear more and more about the airport. Our employments, of course, they're down. We lost a flight, but we still held our own. I mean, to have over 7,000 employments in this month, it's a good record to have, and we're really proud of that. Our total operations are looking good. Again, we'll be down a little bit because we're comparing ourselves to 2 airlines the year before. Community investment starts with beautification, arts, and science, and we have a ton of ongoing projects. I'd like to just give you a little understanding of the amount of projects that they're doing, and we have 2 people currently going to have 3, thankfully, but we are doing not only the ADA project over at the library, where we're going to make it more accessible, but we will be also installing an art piece, which is going to be super exciting. And so here it just shows the team out there that are doing the art piece, trying to configure things and to make sure that it's going to set well. And we had some concrete put in that had to be taken out, and so on and so forth. But again, that's going to be a project that you'll see this spring. We're also part of the Downtown Connection Center, where we're actively working on an art project. We're continuing to enhance the flower program, and not only do we have it downtown, but we've added it to 4th Street, so you'll be seeing things over at 4th Street. We also we're active in all holiday decorations throughout the community. Park flag, we are holding our own. We actually had a 9% increase in November on our park flag, so people are paying the kiosk. Thank you. Again, I like to let everybody know you don't have to pay until 9 a.m. So if you want to go down there and go to your favorite coffee shop, please do. We're not trying to get you not to go downtown. Business attraction, we have several discussions that are going on with potential new restaurants. Vice Mayor Aslan would love to know who they are, and he even sent me a note, and so I will tell you I still can't share that. They're in confidential mode right now, and they're even confidential to me. The only person that knows is Jack Fitchett, our business attraction manager, so That's I don't good know to know what we have to do, but Jack's the man.
So he'll tell us as soon as he can, but he wants you to know that he's actively pursuing these inquiries. Our job creation incentive is full swing. We actually have a little bit more money left in it, so there's ability for people to go to chooseflagstaff.com and look into that incentive. For retention and expansion, we had a listening tour with you last month where some of our businesses came and told you how they were doing. And the one big thing I do need to stress today is we have the ARPA Small Business Grant out. The council before had offered $300,000 of ARPA so that businesses around the community could apply. So they just need to go to chooseflagstaff.com. I can also put this into the chat when I get back to my computer, and you can show them how they can go to, the link is right here, chooseflagstaff.com/small business grant, so how they can apply. If a business has already received COVID funding, they are not eligible. We have thousands and thousands of businesses in the community that did not get any relief, and so we are looking at offering those services and this cash to them. So if you have any questions, John Saltonstall, Mayor, John Saltonstall and Dave McIntyre are online to answer any questions. Mayor.
I think this would be a quick one. They are not eligible if they received any kind of COVID funding from the city or COVID funding from the federal government or the city?
I'm going to let John answer that so that I don't say it wrong and then he has to correct me. So
Okay.
John or Dave, if one of you'd like to share or answer the mayor's question, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. Thanks, Mayor. This is John Saltonstall, Business Retention Expansion Manager. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, the way that we understand it and the way the monies came to the city is that if a business has received that any federal funding, that they would not be eligible for these funds.
But if, oh, okay, so that includes money that came from the city in the first round of small business grants, correct? Because that came from the federal government.
Yeah, and that first round was really, really small that we did through the group with county, NAU, and the DBA. That was a really small portion.
Thank you.
Yes. And again, you know, if they have questions, our team is available to go through it with them.
Yes, Councilmember Harris.
How are people finding out about this money? How are the small businesses able to find out?
So Mayor, Councilmember Harris, we have gone to the Chamber of Commerce and we spoke to them. We've spoken to Kona. We've also spoken to Moonshot at NASET. And we currently have it on our Choose Flagstaff website. And I am now in front of you so that you can help us spread the word. We haven't talked about putting any advertising in the newspaper, but we're open to those ideas. So if there's any suggestions or groups that you'd like us to reach out to, we're happy to do so.
And small business is defined as a business that has a license. Is that correct?
John, I'm going to let you take that question. Did you hear the question from Councilmember Harris?
Yep, did. So what's considered a small business is articulated on the application, and just simply says it has to be locally owned and operated, has to be located within the city limits, and must have fewer than 50 full-time equivalents.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. Any other questions?
Apparently we do. Vice Mayor and then Councilmember House.
This is about the airport. Is that okay? Are we bouncing around too much, or?
If I go over my 5 minutes, it's fine. Go ahead. Greg can't get mad at me.
Well, I do have a question about the airport, and I might not have asked this, except that I see that Josh Mayer is also in the audience today, our public relations fellow from NAU, our community relations guy, works with the university. So this was recently brought to my attention, and Heidi, I mentioned it to you personally, but I thought I'd bring it up here. It came to my attention recently, you know, my wife is the director of the School of Earth and Sustainability at NAU. And she has had to travel occasionally for her role in her job. And she keeps trying to fly out of Flagstaff for any work trips, but the administration keeps denying her travel as too expensive. And so it seems there's a policy at the university to reject local flight departures and arrivals. And I'm just wondering if that's something we can tackle, if that's something you have an appetite to address. And just throwing that out there to leave some tension in the room. It seems to me it would be low-hanging fruit for the university and the city to work together to try to come to maybe a slightly different arrangement on that particular policy. It's frustrating to see her have to drive down to Phoenix and then to drive home when we have a fly out of Flagstaff policy that we're trying to push for the past several years.
Mayor, Vice Mayor Aslan, I just looked over at Josh and we're going to have a conversation, but it's not one that he's able to comment on tonight.
Of course, happy to be a part of instigating the dialogue.
Okay, you got it. We will be getting back to you. We're all working toward the same goal. Real quickly, I'm just going to fly.
Can I, Councilmember House had a question.
I apologize.
No problem at all. I just wanted to note, I was trying to visit the link that was provided for the small business relief funds, and that link is inactive. I think it's just off by a word, but can you just double check that for us?
I probably wrote it wrong on my report, so I apologize. I will definitely get you that link. I'll put it in the chat.
Got it.
Or John or
House.
Dave, if you don't mind putting it in the chat for us right now, I'd appreciate it.
Councilmember House, it is already in the chat.
Thank you.
I just tried the link in the chat and it does seem to be working. So if it's not, please let me know and I'll make sure I get that directly for you.
It's my fault. All right, real quick, go onto the library. Just wanted to let you know things are going in the uptick. Our circulation numbers are rising. Our value of loan materials continues to rise, and that number 543 million is a reminder that if someone had to purchase materials on their own, or our community had to, that's the type of cost it would be. So we're affording our community members a lot. And then our program attendance is huge. So I just wanted to show you those numbers. We had a great event with Shanto Begay, one of our local artists, over at the library. Just want to show you how we bring literacy and art together. We've had some amazing school visits with the children. Love to see that happening again. And we also had a successful library director recruitment. And you'll be meeting Linda Tilson, hopefully in the month of March. When she gets acclimated, I will bring her to get to know you, and she definitely works for city and county library system. Tourism is last but not least. We actually have had good metrics, but we were slightly down in occupancy, and we felt that had a lot to do with the fact that the occupancy number the year before was insane. It was super good, and it was a number that we don't naturally see that high. And so we think that we were just competing with ourselves. Very much looking forward to seeing what December brings about. We've had a lot of marketing, and our efforts have been good. So again, occupancy still good. I wouldn't worry about it, and they're still driving rate throughout our hotels. We had 22 print articles, 181 digital articles, 3 procured stories, and 12 media assists all in 1 month. And I'm not going to go through all those other numbers. Just wanted to let you know we had a major FAM tour that came in from Belgium. I just want you to know the interest internationally is coming back. Our meetings and conferences were in full swing. We had leads over almost close to $700,000 for hotel rooms. And our visitor services were up in retail and walk-ins, which is always great. The snow play hotline that we manage was in full swing. Of course, you get some snow. People want to know where they can play. And last but not least, our creative is amazing. We had our snow play map that you can actually get in English and Spanish. We are talking about how we are really incredibly different than the rest of Arizona, and I think you know that with a 4-season destination. And we also are reminding people that there are a lot of stay and play options. That's all I have. Sorry, Greg. I know I'm supposed to go 5 minutes, but I just can't do it. Any other questions?
I'd just like to say thank you, and thank you for putting the word out about snow play safely and responsibly. And hopefully we can all keep that message out there in front of visitors so that we have fewer conflicts between residents and visitors.
You bet. And I'm so glad you said that real quick. We actually got the word out even more last Friday. Before the weekend Friday, we actually took out an extra ad in the Arizona Republic, and we changed it around based on some considerations from the mayor. Thank you. And Channel 10 is now coming up tomorrow to actively be here and to help share the message of how you play safely in this environment and how you do not tread into private lands and you take your sleds out and you do not litter. And just so you know, it's not just the visitor. We have some of our own residents that are doing it, so we are actually doing some inward marking on that as well.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. We also have monthly reports from Information Technology and Community Development. I don't know who is next. Looks like IT. Thank you, CJ.
All right, Mayor and Council, I'm CJ Perry, your IT Director. Let me, and of course I can't find my thing real quick. There it is. So, I told Heidi I'd give her a couple minutes of my 5 minutes to add to hers, but then she took 13, and I don't know how to give negative time back, so I will do my best to be concise. Our monthly report is often actually focused more on internal staff because we do serve our internal staff, but there's a few things to note for the City Council. One of the things we do in all of our monthly reports is we provide a little tech tip. So this tech tip was written by our Deputy IT Director, Paul Santana, whom all of you should know by now. But just some wonderful information around how to use Teams chat. So I highly recommend you at least look at that first page whenever we send out our monthly report because you'll get some really good tips along the way. We do a staff spotlight every single month, just spotlighting one of our amazing IT staff. This one, we're spotlighting Kelsey. She's our GIS analyst. She's been with the city for about 3 years. She also interned with Water Services for a little bit. Actually, as part of our GIS update, we're also highlighting a project that she did, so I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom. So I apologize for the scrolling, but if you go to gis.flagstaffaz.gov/housing, there's a lot of great data there, a lot of things that you guys can just look over yourselves. So highly recommend you check it out and explore kind of the things that GIS does to help provide information to City Council, to City staff, and to the public. The only other things I kind of wanted to go over are two of our biggest projects that we're working on within IT. One is our fiber project. We are really excited to get that thing moving forward. We are currently looking to invest about $2 million as well as a bunch of conduit infrastructure to try to find a partner, an ISP partner, to bring more fiber to Flagstaff or help some of our fiber providers currently within Flagstaff to provide better services at lower prices to our community. So we're working towards that. We also have an internal project to build fiber from City Hall down to Butler and integrate with our partners over at NEU. So we're really excited to get a lot of these projects started. And then the other big project that we've been working on for quite some time is we have been working to provide full IT support for our police department. We have appreciated the community partnership we've had with our county and our sheriff, that they provided IT support for the police department, but we've been working to take that on ourselves, and I will say that they're a big group to take care of. Our ticket counts have doubled, but we are so thankful that we've been able to provide this service to our police department. So those are some of the highlights. There's plenty of other stuff in there that I will let council look at your leisure. Is there any questions for me?
I checked out the housing GIS maps, and those are awesome. So thanks to Kelsey for that.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll pass that comment along as well.
Any comments? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council members. My name is Dan Folk. I'm the Community Development Director. So I'm very happy to be here this afternoon and give you a few highlights of our monthly report that's in your packet tonight. So first of all, I want to congratulate Genevieve Pearthree, who recently passed her AICP exam. AICP is the American Institute of Certified Planners. And in order to qualify for the exam, you have to have a combination of experience and education. You can then sit for the exam. It's a really important standard for planners. It holds us to a code of ethics and other things. So congratulations to Genevieve on that. We've got a little note about the La Plaza Vieja Community Workshop, which was held on November 17th. And so that project is with Makers. That is a character overlay, which is essentially design standards for new construction within La Plaza Vieja. This was an outcome of the neighborhood plan. Next up is Southside. I know there's been some recent communication. We also have a request from Southside residents to do a character overlay. And so that will be coming up after we finish La Plaza Vieja. We noted back on November 15th, City Council approved the second read on the lighting code amendments. I just wanted to touch on this again because it's really the result of years and years of work. So probably 5-6 years ago, we had a light pollution study that was provided by the Naval Observatory explaining that if we don't do something on our lighting code and some other things, I think they identified 6 things that they felt needed to be done in order to preserve the mission of the Naval Observatory. After that, there was funding for the joint land use study, which we did in partnership with the county. And the county really took the lead on that. And again, it looked at impacts of the Naval Observatory, both things that need to be done to protect their mission as well as impacts they may have on our community. And so the final thing is just implementing the outcomes of that, right? So one of them was the dark sky lighting position, which is co-funded by the city and the county. We're really excited to have that. Janice Hockla is our current dark sky specialist. The other big thing was street lighting, which was accomplished a couple years ago. SLEDs, the street lighting to enhance dark skies. Again, the trend on white LEDs, very damaging to the night sky. And then the third thing was this code amendment, which identified, again, fine-tuning our technical standards, not only for LED lighting, but some of the other things as well. So again, so happy that this has been adopted. I want to thank Tiffany Antol, our zoning code manager, who took this over the finish line after multiple years of work. So thank you to council for getting that done. We have had a number of new hires in the last month that we've highlighted in the report. As you know, we had a lot of openings up in our building safety code compliance section. So we've hired Brian Cook and Philip Clark, our 2 new plan reviewers. Stephanie Brown is our new permit tech, all up in building safety. And then Melissa Nelson is a new hire down here at our front counter. She's in current planning, development services specialist. And so those are folks that hopefully you'll get to meet, particularly Melissa down at the front counter. We're very excited to welcome them. On the housing front, you've got a link to the December newsletter from our housing section. There's information about the approval of Proposition 442, which is actually, obviously a huge accomplishment. These things don't just happen by putting things on the ballot, right? Years and years of building partnerships, educating the community. I really want to congratulate Sarah Dar and her team for the years of work, again, on educating, right? And helping to demonstrate the need. And so what's coming up next is how do we implement the bond funds as well as the 10-year plan. And so on January 26th, the Housing Commission is going to be considering an implementation plan that Sarah and her team have put together, and then that would come on to City Council after that. Also, it mentions 3 closings on permanent affordable units. I believe these were all land trust units. 2 were in Crestview, 1 was a resale in Rio. And so these are ones where the city retains ownership of the property and the purchaser is buying the home. It helps control the cost. On the real estate front, one of the mentions was we were able to close on what we called the sliver over by the new Downtown Connection Center. So over on Phoenix, right in the middle of the property we own where the Downtown Connection Center is, there was this little sliver that BNSF owned. And after a couple years, we finally were able to close on that. So we now own the sliver, which is, again, a lot of work behind the scenes. And then finally on building activity, you'll see permits continue to be up year to date. Valuation is down from last year. I think that's a reflection of just some of the types of projects. But the raw permit numbers are up. Again, a sign of all the hard work of our plan review, building inspection, current planning, all of our development partners throughout the organization that do development review. And then we have a code compliance report, which really shows the scope of issues that our code team works on. So we're really working on this monthly report. I would love to get feedback on information that you feel would be useful for this report. I want to thank Victoria Martin, our Community Development Administrative Specialist, who's been doing this report. And we're going to keep growing it and making it new and exciting with all kinds of great information. Any questions for me tonight?
Vice Mayor has a question.
Yeah, the city manager alluded to this earlier. I'm wondering if you have memorized the number of streetlights that are in the queue backlogged for replacement.
I don't. That's in our, actually the streetlights I think are in the streets group, but between Jeff Bauman and streets, they would know.
Maybe
the
Greg has
phasing
an
for
idea. Is it
implementing those
something
changes,
like 100 or 800?
It's phased over a number of years, I can tell you that, yeah.
You can get back to me on that anytime. It's fine.
And I'm wondering where we are with the hiring the consultant to look over the building codes?
Yes. So that is currently sitting in procurement. We're looking for final approval to put that out on the street. And so we've put together 2 RSOQs. One is for the land analysis and suitability study. And so that's going to look at our current zoning, our land, kind of the resource protection, other things. Do we currently have the land to meet our targeted goals, right, for the 10-year housing plan, the sustainability goals? So that's one piece of it. And then the other piece is the review of all of our codes, right? So zoning code, building code, and that was funded jointly through housing and sustainability. And so we've written 2 SRQs, but we want to put them out together. We're hoping that one group will want to work on both because they really are related, but we'll also consider proposals from 2 different groups. But we're hoping to get that out here very soon here in January, I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How long will that be open? Like, when could we see someone working on it?
I'm not sure how long we're going to keep it open, but once we receive proposals, we'll have a team that reviews the proposals. We'll come back to council to award a contract, and then we'll start the project schedule after the contract is awarded.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? The RSOQ will be open for 30 days. Thank you.
Look at that instant real-time information. Who was that from, Michelle? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Michelle. Everyone have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Dan, CJ, and Heidi. Great discussion. That concludes the manager's report, unless there's any other questions for me. Thanks.
Thank you. I had a delay in my laptop here. So now we are down to item 7, Neighborhood Partnership Coalition. And we have a presentation, I believe, from our partners at NAU. Welcome.
Hi. Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. Today I will be presenting on the Off-Campus Life Neighborhood Liaison position and sharing an update on a program that will be relaunched. My name is Valeria Chase, and I have been in this joint role since January of 2018. I'm a proud Army veteran and a double NAU alumna, where I received my degrees in human relations. I have a background in student affairs and have work experience in victim advocacy, conflict resolution, working with diverse populations, and research. I'd like to share a little bit of history of how the neighborhood liaison position came about. In 2014, a community conversation was hosted by Coconino County, City Council, and NAU to begin addressing the issue of student housing in Flagstaff, considering both the needs of students and the importance of maintaining the character of all neighborhoods that make Flagstaff unique. Other purposes of this conversation were to promote understanding of the student housing development and neighborhood issues with the intention of unifying the community and to educate themselves on best practices and models used by other college towns. Following the presentations, small groups had an opportunity to debrief and collectively recommended actions. One being the creation of the joint position between the City of Flagstaff and NAU, modeled after an existing Colorado State University and Fort Collins position. In 2016, an IGA was signed, and this role became reality. It is managed by both the City of Flagstaff and the university. I currently report to Sarah Langley with Public Affairs and Josh Mayer with NAU External Affairs and Partnerships. The purpose of this role is to work in a variety of ways to promote positive relationships between students and local residents in the Flagstaff neighborhoods. Since its inception, we have grown to enhance additional positive outcomes beyond addressing code of conduct and behavior issues to enhancing service projects, sharing community historical information, and increasing joint planning. Some of the implemented programs to date include the Community Welcome Walk, Donate, Don't Ditch, and the Off-Campus Living Course. A program that existed before my time was the Good Neighborhood Coalition. The Good Neighborhood Coalition went on hiatus to evaluate its mission, participation, and to define its purpose and meeting structure. After thoughtful planning and broad research, an effective model from another town and gown community has been utilized to restructure our new version of the Good Neighborhood Coalition. The Good Neighbor Coalition will be relaunched as a Neighborhood Partnership Coalition. It will serve as a medium of communication and information sharing for members and neighborhoods about issues, concerns, and opportunities facing Flagstaff neighborhoods. It will be reestablished as a joint working team between the City of Flagstaff and NAU. It aligns with both the city's priority-based budgeting objectives and NAU's strategic roadmap, and it aligns with fair item requests to build better relationships with neighborhoods, and proactively addresses issues that are of mutual concern to the groups represented in the coalition. Constituents who will be invited to the Neighborhood Partnership Coalition meeting include Flagstaff residents, students, business owners, community leaders, city staff, police officers, and university administrators. The university administrators include those whose mission is to improve the relationships among students, law enforcement, and off-campus neighbors. Sorry, I had the notes pasted from one slide to the other. The city departments or divisions that will be part of the NPC, Neighborhood Partnership Coalition, include the City Manager's Office, Community Development, Housing, Community Investment, Engineering, Fire, Police, Pros, Public Works, Sustainability, and Water. So here I will share a little bit of how the coalition will work in regards to its meeting and timeline. We will meet, the MPC consists of agenda preparation meetings, regular coalition meetings, and special topics meetings. At the agenda preparation meetings, they will take place a month before each coalition meeting. The topics and presenters will be identified at that time. At the actual coalition meeting, it will take place twice a year, and in the spring and the fall, and each presenter that was identified at the preparation meeting will share their department's high-level update. There will be special topic meetings, and they are by request on a different date after the coalition meeting, if more time is needed to allow collaboration. What I forgot to mention for the coalition meeting, there will be time for question and answer afterwards, after their update. And if there is not enough time or further concern, or something isn't able to be fully resolved during that time, that's where the special topic meetings will come to play, and by request. The meetings are scheduled to take the fourth Thursday of the month, so we are just meeting twice a year, but it will be on the fourth Thursday of the month, and it does not overlap with neighborhood association and/or block watch meetings, and the coalition meeting will take place in the evening. The Neighborhood Partnership Coalition is also meant to complement all the block watch meetings, the neighborhood association meetings, and provide supplemental information. I'd like to say that it's exciting to see the Neighborhood Partnership Coalition starting again under its new name and the community engagement that will come with it. All right, so this concludes my presentations. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do we have questions, comments? Yes, Councilmember Harris.
I'm not sure that I understand. So is this group going to meet every month, and then twice a year you'll do like a community meeting where you report out?
Thank you, Councilmember Harris. It will be only the Neighborhood Partnership Coalition meeting will meet twice a year. And the staff and the people who will be providing updates at the Neighborhood Partnership Coalition meetings will meet one month prior to that meeting. So let's say the first meeting, my goal is to have it on February 23rd. The city departments and university participants will meet in January to prepare the agenda and decide who's going to give those presentations. We have that. They present their updates in February 23rd, and then we don't meet, let's say, until October. So September, we'll have the preparation meeting, the Neighborhood Partnership Coalition, which is where the neighbors and students and business owners gather, and so that'll be the second Neighborhood Partnership Coalition meeting of the year.
Okay. So how will you determine what topics are covered at the February and the October meeting?
So in January, I will be the people who were the city staff and the university staff that will come to the preparation meeting. They will bring the topics that are relevant to the neighborhoods, and that is information that needs to be known by the neighbors or the businesses. And so that's when they'll tell us, or I'll be facilitating the meeting. They'll tell me what topics they want to talk about, and then they'll decide who's going to present on that topic, and an agenda will be sent out to all the participants who are invited, so that they can have in advance know what we're going to be talking about.
I have a question. If a council member, so I'm assuming that staff will send council members the agenda prior to the meeting. And if a council member has heard a concern that they would like to be talked about when you're getting your meeting together, who would we share that information with? Would it be Sarah?
Can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
Yes, so if, say, one of us hears a concern about something going on between NAU students and other residents in a neighborhood, how do we bring that concern to you for possible discussion at the meeting?
Mayor, it could be brought directly to me or Sarah or Josh. as well. And then they're both my supervisors, so they'll send the information to me, but it can be sent to me directly.
Wonderful.
With their
Wonderful.
CC or however you prefer. But once it gets to me, I'll bring those departments and those concerns to the people who they relate to, and ask them to attend that meeting as well, so we can have that conversation.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions, comments? I don't see anything online. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now we are down to agenda item 8, consideration and approval of our 2023 legislative priorities.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Just give me a minute to pull up our documents here for your review. All right. So Sarah Langley, your Public Affairs Director, back in front of you this week to discuss the legislative priorities. I believe Bob and Todd are also online, or they'll be joining shortly, so if we have any questions, we can pull them in if needed. So as you know, we met with you last week to gather your feedback. We've taken a stab at inputting that into the priorities. So I'll go over the changes we made and then take any last comments or questions that you may have. So we'll get started with the state priorities. You can see the final draft here up on the screen, also in your agenda packet. So to incorporate your feedback, we added a line to the forest health priority, which is right here. And in this edition, we focused on supporting increased local input for decision-making processes related to the sale of consumer fireworks. That is within state law, so we thought that that would be relevant within our state priorities. Another change that we made at the state level is within the environmental funding and partnership priority here. You can see that we added a mention of wildlife corridors to that priority, so we can keep that in mind as we move through the session. Mayor, if you like, I can pause for any comments here. I can move to the federal priorities.
Does anyone have any comments or questions on this portion? All right.
All right.
Feel free to go ahead.
Thank you. So some similar changes were made in the federal priorities. Within the forest health, sorry, where am I? Apologies. Sorry, it went over to the new column. So within the forest health priority, which is a bit longer now and spans 2 columns, we added a similar line here to increase local input in decision-making processes. But here we're focusing on those fire restrictions and national forest closures, things that are set at the federal level. So that one kind of spans both areas. We also added a line to the post-wildfire flood mitigation to advocate for affordable flood insurance premiums for Flagstaff residents, as Council brought that up last time as a very salient concern for our community. Under the Grand Canyon Protection Act priority, and we have moved to 2 pages now, so I'll scroll down a bit. We did add an explicit mention of water to this priority. We heard Council's discussion of that last time, and we wanted it to be clear that we are advocating for the protection of water resources as well as wildlife and cultural resources. And then lastly, we made that same mention of wildlife corridors under the environmental partnership and funding priority, as it seems that that priority could span state and federal agencies as well. So that's just a brief overview of the changes we made. Again, happy to take any comments or questions. Thanks.
Council, do we have any? Yes, Councilmember Matthews.
Thank you, Mayor. Sarah, I had a couple of questions just for clarification. I apologize for being a newbie here and just trying to, understand everything. And actually, one of them, the first one I'm going to mention, probably would fall more on the state side, but it's under workforce development, under the economy that's currently listed on the federal legislative priorities. I feel like we have a gap there that we're not mentioning more business development, bringing more job opportunities in. So similar to what I think the police department has experienced in the past, where we send people off-site to train and then we risk losing them. We are focusing on workforce development, and then we don't have jobs for them to go to. So I'm wondering if we could add attracting more industry that fits our focuses into the city. And then should I go on to my second one? I just had two. And then I also just kind of caught my attention on the federal legislative priorities. I just felt a little uncomfortable, and all these priorities are so good, and I was really impressed with both Bob and Todd, feeling confident and comfortable in them putting forth our requirements and stuff. But it just made me feel a little uncomfortable when I was reading under the climate change this to advocate for climate fee and dividend legislation. I did some research. I'm far from having, even a slight knowledge on all that information, but it just seems to be a real overreaching and aggressive goal right now, given that we still need countrywide infrastructure and technology to really support that. So I'm just thinking out loud, that is this at the appropriate time to put that on a priority when maybe we're not quite there yet, and is our whole population here in Flagstaff, would they agree? I don't know, that is a top priority to be paying a lobbyist to put forward. And I just wanted to express that more for just putting that tension out there and bringing that awareness.
Thank you. Do you have a response for that? If not, I was wondering if maybe someone from sustainability could catch us up on whether there's been a prior discussion or how that landed.
Sure. Mayor, just to provide, Mayor and Council Member, thank you for the comments, to provide a bit of feedback on the climate change priority. I believe in the past, maybe back in 2021, our sole priority was focused on climate fee and dividend legislation. We then Council made the choice last year to broaden the priority, which is what you see here. So it appears as one piece, but it's not the entire priority. I see Bob is online. He might have some feedback on, if this is going to be a salient issue this year at the legislature. And then maybe we can also hear from Council on your thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Mayor and Council, Bob Holmes, good to see you all. Looking forward to seeing you actually next week. So the reason, and Sarah had it right, the reason we landed on the carbon fee dividend legislation, it was that at the point we discussed this, and this actually goes back a few years, was Senator Flake had legislation, and that was the only legislation that was really moving in the climate change arena. I would say with Republican control of the House, it's probably the only thing that's feasible right now. And I don't think, frankly, any climate change legislation will move in a Republican House in the next 2 years. So I hear loud and clear the messages from the council member as well as you, Mayor. And, I think we've never made it a top priority in terms of we're going to DC to lobby this, but this has always been an issue in the back of our minds and addressing some of these issues.
Sorry about that delay. I have a horribly long password on my laptop, and it keeps going down, and I have to keep looking up what my password is. Thank you, Bob. Does sustainability have, Jim says, looks good. Does sustainability have anything that they would like to add?
Hi, Mayor Daggett. This is Jenny Neiman, Climate Program Manager. Really, we can just echo what Bob said. He is the expert. Along with Sarah, we have our incredibly lucky to have really 3 different climate laws that went through in the last session, and that, as Bob said, have always been on our radar, that issue. But yeah, I think that Bob's sort of analysis of the situation with the House right now is pretty fair.
Thank you. Councilmember Matthews, do you feel comfortable with where it stands?
Yes, I appreciate it. Again, I'm just trying to get up to speed, and I read words like increased cost and cost of living, and we're facing a lot of that here in Flagstaff. So I was just curious and wanted a little bit more conversation. So I appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments?
Mayor, can I just ask for some additional clarification on the workforce development?
Yes, please.
We heard a comment from Councilmember Matthews about adding language to, or related to attracting industries that fit within our community. If the majority of council is supportive of that, we can approve with a note that we will add that language in there, probably several words or so.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, so thank you, and thank you, Councilmember Matthews. I want to understand better what that looks like. Todd, I don't know if you're with us. How do we lobby for, how do you lobby as our lobbyist at the state legislature for bringing jobs to Flagstaff? I feel like we have an apparatus for that here at the city within our organizational infrastructure. I'm not sure it's entirely appropriate or overlaps with your role. So if you have thoughts on that, please share them now.
Well, Mayor Daggett, Council Member Aslan, I mean, I think you raise a really good point. I think how I would view the comment and how I would view the verbiage as being the city council would, if you all adopted it, City Council would support policies that encourage economic development in the Northern Arizona region in the long term. And as I view this verbiage right now, I would echo what Bob says. Is I think you're going to have a hard time getting something that deals with carbon taxation through the legislature at the state level is, impossible. It's certainly very difficult. And so, I mean, I would view all of this verbiage as sort of, if an opportunity arises, strike while the iron's hot and get to it. You don't need to go out and create an opportunity where none exists, because I do think that would be sort of a time sink and sort of a waste of resources. But as far as the specific piece of legislation that I haven't seen a specific piece of legislation that deals with economic development in a region since, I mean, I guess you could make some of the arguments, some of the corporate taxation policies were there, but I don't know how. I can't. I'm hard pressed to think of the last time there was a specific legislation geared towards a specific region of the state for economic development purposes.
So what I'm hearing is that there wouldn't be any downside to including language, and perhaps we could make sure that we are differentiating between legislation and taxation if it comes to a lobbying matter. Does that make sense?
Well, that makes perfect. If the question's directed to me, it makes sense to me, Madam Mayor. So yeah, that makes sense to me, and I'm happy to live within those boundaries. It's not impossible to do.
Thank you. Any council member? Yes, please.
Apologies, Mayor. Just a quick clarification. This workforce development priority is currently listed on our federal priorities. I understand the council members thought that, there's also a nexus to the state level. So if you like, we could repeat that language on our state priorities as well, with the caveat that Todd just mentioned.
I think that would be good. All right, I am not seeing any additional questions or concerns or comments, and general head nodding. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We'll get this cleaned up and we will send it to you for your reference. It'll also be available on our website. So,
Thank you so much.
Thank you, council members.
Okay, we're down to item 9, Interbasin Waterline Project Update. All right, we have several people.
We have quite the team here. Takes a team on this one, definitely. So I'm going to let him pull that up, and then we're just going to, hello, Mayor, council members, Stacy Breckenleg, City of Flagstaff. I'm the Grants Contracts and Emergency Management Director. And we have quite a team on this. This has been a big project back in 2010 after the Schultz fire, and again now after the Pipeline West fire and flooding. So I'm going to go ahead and I've introduced myself. I'm going to go ahead and let the team members just jump up here real quick and introduce themselves, and then when we get into the presentation, we'll just roll right with it, if that's good. All right, David, you want to go?
Yeah. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, David Peterson, Capital Improvements Project Manager.
Brian Hunsinger, Water Production Manager for Flagstaff Water Services.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, I'm Chuck English with Hunter Contracting, President. Thank you.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council, my name's Bob Carlson, also with Hunter Contracting Company. Thank you for having us today.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council, pleasure to meet you. Nick Musto, Deputy District Ranger for Flagstaff Ranger District.
Good evening, Ed Shank, Stormwater Manager.
And then I think, Berwin, are you on with Jacobs Engineering? If you can, yeah, you turned your camera on. Hi, Berwin.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. I'm Berwin Wilbrink with Jacobs Engineering, also supporting the team with the design.
Great, thank you so much. All right, Interbasin Waterline. So we're going to go ahead and go through this presentation. You've met a lot of the team members. There's even more behind the scenes. I know Doug, he was here in the room. He is also co-managing with David. So there's a number of team members even beyond this. So it's taken quite a bit. So Interbasin Waterline, and we'll do questions at the end if you're good with that. And we'll go ahead and go through it. So a little bit about, I'm going to go a little bit on the history on this project, and then we'll turn it over to Brian to talk about today's, and then continue on with David on where we're at with the damage. But back in 1882, I'm going to cheat and look at some of my notes because there's some factual information I don't want to miss. So 1882, remember that date. That was a long time ago, right? City officials sought to secure a safe and abundant, reliable water source. They turned their attention to the Jack Smith Spring in the Interbasin on the San Francisco Peaks. And in the spring of 1898, they solicited bids to construct a 6-inch clay pipeline from the Interbasin down to the reservoir. The voters approved a $10,000 bond to cover the cost, $10,000. It's not that today. I wish it was, but much more expensive. And then that line at that time served about 300 customers. They paid $2 a month. And then we'll talk a little bit later about the 50 million gallon storage tanks that are there. Brian will get a little bit more detailed into that and show you some photos of it. So this is a cool picture. Pipeline was created. They hauled to the site by horse and installed the hand-dug trenches to construct 13 miles of pipeline. And then in 1914, when the Santa Fe Railroad came, and then there was the boom of all the lumber and timber industry and businesses, a second 8-inch line clay pipe was installed, a new 50 million gallon storage reservoir, and the construction of a 12-foot wide access road along the pipeline. So that was back in 1914. And then in the 1930s, they built a 15-inch concrete pipe and another storage reservoir. And then in the 1990s, they replaced the 15-inch concrete pipe with the 16-inch ductile. So there was a lot of pipe, being installed at different phases throughout the decades. And then there's approximately 8.5 miles of ductile iron pipe that was laid. So that was all back, 1930s, 1990s. And you can see here is some of the pipe. You can see the 1890s, the 1914, 1930s, and then the ductile iron pipe in the photo. And then at that time, there was 2 million gallons of summer peak flow and 15% of demand, and that's changed a little bit as today, but back in that time frame, it was 15%. A little bit, see, these are kind of some fun photos. The Interbasin provided a reliable summer water source. Between 1966 and 1971, there were 13 case wells constructed in the Interbasin. 8 of them were exploration holes, and then 5 were constructed to produce water. Between the 1890s and 1961, that was a good year. It was my birthday. 7 large springs were developed from the groundwater aquifers. And then the water from the Interbasin is delivered by a gravity fed. It's really coming from the inner basins into the peaks, and it's a gravity fed line. And then it goes right to the reservoir, and it's about 2,000 feet in elevation of that line. So kind of interesting. But some kind of cool pictures of it, early on before the fires. This is before Schultz Fire. And then 2010, we had the San Francisco Peaks, the Schultz Fire, which burned 24 square miles burned. And then subsequently after that, in June, 12 years later, the pipeline fire and subsequent flooding in June of 22, which that fire was 26,000 acres. After the Schultz Fire, there was a number of damage to the pipeline and extended along a 6-mile stretch. There was 28 damaged sites. And also at the very bottom near site 26, 27, it veered off into a concrete line into the Kachina Peak Wilderness area. And so what we ended up doing in the 2010 interbasin damage, we ended up pulling that line out of the Kachina Wilderness area since we had that opportunity. We relocated, rerouted about 3,600 linear feet of concrete pipe to high-density polypropylene pipe out of the wilderness area. And then it was placed in the Forest Service roadway and the Transwestern pipeline. So during the 2010 event, we had a number of damaged sites and fixed this water line. And we were able to hire a design build contract in 2010, and we hired Jacobs Engineering and Hunter Contracting. And now with this pipeline fire, we were able to go back and do a direct selection through emergency procurement and hire them to come back and to, they were the engineer of record. They actually won a state award and a national award for this pipeline work that we did on the Schultz Fire in 2010. And so they are now working on this pipeline again, 12 years later, to see if we can fix it. So here's a little bit about showing you some of the damage. And you can see what happened in 2010. There was a lot of damage to the water line from the fire and subsequent flooding. They worked to this bottom right hand, on the left-hand side, bottom right. They encapsulated some of the pipeline in the road and put concrete pads over it, did some gabion walls, did everything we could to protect that water line. And then if you look on the right, your left, the pipeline fire 22, you can see some of the damage that it really held intact. It did a good job, and David's going to show you a number of good, bad, and ugly pictures of what it looks like today. But a lot of it did pretty good. I think we estimated maybe a couple of spots that it's broke, but it's a lot of debris. It damaged the gabion baskets. Broke some of the water line, and then a lot of debris on the road. So there's a lot of work ahead of us. But in retrospect, 12 years later, and with the 2 different fires, it held up pretty good. So with that, we'll go ahead and I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
Stacy covered a lot of the history of our interbasin springs and wells. To reiterate, it was Flagstaff's first major water supply stretching back to the late 1800s. It wasn't until the 40s that we added upper Lake Mary or surface water, and then in the 50s we started drilling groundwater wells in our Woody Mountain well field. So really for close to the first half century, Flagstaff depended on interbasin springs as well as those found around town. Compared to our local wells, some of those are drilled 2,500 feet deep. It takes a lot of energy to bring that water up to land surface. Interbasin springs are hands down the most inexpensive water source or least expensive water source for the city of Flagstaff. Spring flow is highly variable, depends on snowpack. We harvest the water in the summer months when that snowpack melts. Current peak flows have been seen over 1,400 gallons a minute or 2 million gallons per day. That represents about 20% of the city's peak consumption during summer months, which is about 10 million gallons per day. In addition to the springs, we have our interbasin wells. There's 3 of the wells in the interbasin. Those were added in the 60s and 70s. Each of the wells has a capacity 300 to 700 gallons per minute. Those are highly variable or adjustable. Combined capacity of all 3 wells is 2 to 3 million gallons per day, also representing about 20% of Flagstaff's peak summertime consumption. The wells are all off-grid or diesel-powered, requiring the delivery with our diesel tanker truck in the lower right weekly, depending on how many wells we're running, what speed or flow rate we're running the wells. And we use the waterline road to deliver the fuel with the fuel truck to the wells. Both spring and well water are treated at our North Reservoir Filtration Plant that's at the bottom of the hill near the junction of Eldon Lookout Road and Schultz Pass. The design capacity of the treatment plant is 4 million gallons per day. A couple years ago in 2018, it was one of a handful of water production locations we outfitted with backup power capabilities, manual transfer switch. You can see a portable generator here. The treatment plant is not only a source, but it's also a booster station. For those reasons, it's one of the few locations we have backup power capabilities. With gravity-fed spring flow, as Stacy mentioned, diesel-powered wells, and then a treatment plant with backup power capabilities, we can run the source in a blackout scenario or power loss for the city of Flagstaff. When interbasin spring water isn't used for either poor water quality or insufficient flow, we divert the water to one of these 2 50 million gallon reservoirs that Stacy also mentioned. The one on your right no longer holds water, however the one on your left, which is on the west, still holds about 20 million gallons. The Western Reservoir has been used extensively for firefighting for all major wildland fires over the last couple decades. Here you see a helicopter dip during the museum fire of 2019. In the pipeline fire this last summer, as many as 120 helicopter dips were made per day. And then in the upper right picture, during the pipeline fire, we also assisted firefighters in the interbasin with a hose lay directly connected off of one of our interbasin wells. We also gave them access to spring water. In summary, the springs are our oldest water supply, one that we can use in a power loss scenario and has been used for firefighting. It's also a critical water supply, representing as much as 20% peak summertime consumption. With that, I'll turn it over to Nick.
Hey, good afternoon. What I wanted to go over tonight is what goes into it from the Forest Service side to get this project ready to implement. So because this project occurs on federal land, we have to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act, commonly referred to as NEPA. And so the steps of that process is that, first, as soon as we get from the engineers the what they want to do and the where they want to do it, we can take that out to internal scoping, getting a review by our specialist, our hydrologist, our engineering staff, and then take it out for public comment, public scoping period. That's a 30-day window soliciting feedback from the public. Another important component of everything we do in the Coconino National Forest is a tribal consultation. There are 13 tribes that hold these lands to be sacred, and this project is proposed within the San Francisco Peaks traditional cultural property, and that's just kind of an area of heightened tribal concern and consideration. And so after hearing back from the public and from the tribes, there's really two laws that kind of drive our timelines into how fast we can get to be ready to implement on this project. And that's the National Historic Preservation Act, and that's when you involve the archaeologist, you have survey, we have compliance with the State Historic Preservation Office, and I'm referred to as Arizona SHPO. They have 30 days after we submit our report to provide feedback. And then the other law that kind of drives our timelines on these sort of projects is the Endangered Species Act. So we have Mexican spotted owl nesting in the area. Not expected to have a big impact on this project, but we need to consult with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And so they are provided a 60-day period to provide us feedback after we submit the report to them. So looking at both the scoping periods as well as our legal compliance, it's reasonable to expect that we could get this project through and have a decision memo ready to sign, and as soon as that's signed, implement, kind of looking towards the end of May and very early part of June. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy, Brian, and Nick. As Stacy alluded to when we started the presentation, it takes a behemoth of a team to do a project like this. It's exciting to serve on the team. Our partners at the U.S. Forest Service make a lot of this possible with permitting. A lot of the pictures today were done by escorts with the Forest Service to allow access for city staff, including myself, to get up there to be able to do drone missions and collect some of the imagery that you'll see today, as well as Arizona DEMA, Hunter Contracting, Jacobs Engineering, a multitude of city staff, as well as Coconino County personnel. We're going to have a series of GMPs, or guaranteed maximum price, that comes before council. In this presentation, I'm going to specifically talk about 3. There could be 4, and I'll talk about that when I get to the third one. But what's going to come before council next week will be GMP 1. So GMP 1 is with Hunter Contracting. Jacob Engineering is a subconsultant to Hunter on the design. It's a really beautiful thing when we can have our contractor and our designer working together and streamlining that process, giving feedback during design on constructability, materials, and where money can be saved as well. So it's a design build. The details of this GMP, we're looking at just under $190,000. The scope of the work is what's called a 30% design. The 30% design will be for 45 plus impacted sites. I call it 45 plus because as of September 7th, when we did the last drone mission, there was about 45 to 48 sites that were impacted. We've had storms since then, so we're thinking that number could be between 45 and 50, but for the sake of the presentation, we're going to call it 45 plus, just to clarify that number. We're not expecting that to go much higher than the 45-50 window. As part of that 30% design, we also get an estimate cost of construction, or the engineer's opinion of probable construction cost, as well as a Class 1 environmental study. So that's this map on the right here. Everything within this red polygon is what there's going to be a document search looking at all the environmental impacts of the work that could take place in this corridor. So that is done in conjunction with the Forest Service to ensure that we have environmental clearance for the project. As mentioned, GMP 1, that's going to be going through spring of 2023, at which time we're kind of thinking right now, probably the end of April, we'll be coming forth with GMP 2 to finalize design. Without being able to put boots on the ground up there, we have to wait until the snowpack melts off to be able to do field trips up there. We have future LIDAR, or light detection and ranging missions, to get survey grade. We're really going off of drone imagery and any previous existing LIDAR imagery for the design for the 30% level. So to get that confidence level up, we really need to be able to get up there some field trips with the design team and the project team to really hone in the actual finalization of the design, which is what's going to come forth probably in that April timeframe, going through summer and into fall. The GMP for the third one would be for construction. And the caveat there is we might have 2 for construction if we are able to get in earlier to repair the water line, and then we can take care of the bulk of the road repair in a GMP 4. So if we're able to get up there sooner and do repair to the water line to really put back intact that critical water infrastructure, we'll look into streamlining and kind of expediting the construction and repair of the water line ahead of the road repair. But that would come late summer, fall of 23, and then we'd be looking at construction through 24 and into fall of 24 or summer of 24. And then the last contract that would come before council would be an inspection services contract. That was implemented also during the Schultz Creek fire as well. We need to make sure that the materials being installed meet engineering standards, that they are installed in a way that is congruent with the materials, as well as that they are functioning and they've been tested so that the water is coming down as it needs to. That will follow what's called an RSOQ, or requests for statements of qualification. There's a committee that's formed. All the applicants or firms that want to apply are then ranked by points and potentially interviewed as well. That final candidate will be brought forth to City Council with a contract for those services. There's a lot of information on this slide, so we'll walk through this one here. As we go through the imagery for the 10 sites that I'm sharing, I can't accurately show a map and the images at the same time, so I've printed this really large poster here. And hopefully you can follow along as we go down the points, but I'm just going to walk through the map before we get into it here. The charcoal kind of grayish outline here is actually the pipeline burn scar. You can see the point of origin down here in the southwest corner, generally burned to the northeast. This purple-blue tonality here is the Schultz fire reburn area. So obviously there was a lot of burned area in the Schultz fire, but there are a couple biological legacies that remain. So some of that downwoody debris and even live trees that survived the last fire didn't survive this fire. So that footprint is juxtaposition to the pipeline fire. So that signature is shown there in the blue and the purple. The blue tonality over here is the Schultz Creek watershed. So as you can see, that's below the Waterline Road. Waterline Road is this black line that goes up, hooks around Inner Basin. You can kind of see the inner caldera of Inner Basin following around here, Fremont Peak, Doyle Peak. And these are the wells that Brian was showing. So we didn't want to mess with the numbering system from the previous work on the Schultz fire, which was sites 1 through 28. So in order to do that, we had to do an alphanumeric system. So we started with A, going down to L, because there's damage north of the previous Schultz fire work, and then there's damage south of the previous Schultz fire work. So that's when we continued the numbering 29 through 35. And then to increase that, we also have sites that were impacted between existing sites from the Schultz fire. So you can see in there that we have a 24A, 24B, 24C. So it was the one way that we could account for impacted sites between previously established sites. So if there's any questions on how the numbering goes, please feel free to ask. But I hope that is a good explanation as we're going through these points on their order going down. Sites go from north to south, so previous impacts, it's a larger footprint than we had with the Schultz fire. And then also just the diversity of this environment that we're working in. So down here at point 35 is about 7,600 feet above mean sea level. And then as you go up in Inner Basin, we're just under 9,500 feet. So it's a blessing because we can work at different elevations at different times of the year, but it's also, the snowpack resides a lot longer at 9,500 feet than it does at 7,600 feet. So something that we'll have to balance with the complexity of this project. Down here on the bottom right, we have an elevational profile of Waterline Road. As you can see, this starts just south of 28 on Schultz Pass Road, and then actually continues all the way around to the north side of the peaks into Abbinaw Canyon. But our extent of our project is this orange box here, point 28, following the gentle road grade up to point A. So just for context of what we're looking at here. And now we get to the fun part. For those that haven't been up on Waterline Road, this is a pretty typical exposure of the road. It is not your typical passenger vehicle road. There's a lot of exposure downhill, cliffs typically uphill, steep grades, narrow curves. The points for this pipeline damage, I tried to show the presentation from least impacted to the most impacted. So the pictures are going to get progressively worse as we go along. Again, 45 plus sites on this design that we're looking at, and this presentation is going to share 10 of them. So keep in mind that there's many more that I don't have pictures for. I wish we had the time, but we don't have the popcorn. So here at point 4A, you can see there's sedimentation on the road. Not much blockage of the road, but a lot of down woody debris. Point A, again, it's on the very northern end of the map in Inner Basin. You can see the incision of the drainage channel here, a couple feet in depth, a couple feet in breadth. The interesting point here is that this is probably about half a mile from the nearest burn affected area, but this is the drainage that drains the north side of Doyle, the north side of Fremont, and that slope comes down through this area. And this is a critical area just before the road splits off into interbasin and accesses those wells. So this is the northernmost or highest elevation point of the points that we're working with. As we go down point 3B, so a little bit further south, these are well casings that were used to hold back the road and material during the Schultz fire. These actually had perpendicular timbers across here. Great resource usefulness of reutilizing material, but timbers burn in fire. So those timbers are no longer shown in that image, but the well casings did survive. Having Jacobs on board with design, will be able to reutilize a lot of this infrastructure that's currently in place. But again, a lot of that deposition on the road of sediment, some incising or some rills on the road of drainage crossing, a lot more debris on the downhill side. Point 25 is going to be the first structure that we get to show as part of the Schultz fire remediation work. Again, I want to point out that these structures were designed and put in response to the Schultz fire. These were not designed for a pipeline fire, but we're very fortunate that they were there because it held a lot of this mountainside back. So as we get a couple slides down to point I keep in mind what these sites could potentially look like if we didn't have these structures anchored into the mountain here. There is some damage to these structures, and part of the design on this next phase will be looking at how we can repair some of those gabions. As Stacy pointed out earlier, we do have a concrete cap on top. These are anchored into the bedrock, as well as these gabions, which think of like a chain link fence filled with rock and then anchored into the mountain. So they're really robust. They do a really good job of holding things together. I'm going to let you guys sit on point 24 here. This rock, for scale, these gabion walls are about 3 feet in height. That rock, ironically, is shaped and about the size of a large SUV. It's about 7 or 8 feet tall. It's about 10 or 12 feet long. Thankfully, ended up right on the road. And you can see down here these impacted sites, these craters in the gabion wall. Think of a small car-sized rock tumbling down, smashing into these walls as it comes down. And you can see here at point 22, some of these smaller rocks, I should use the phrase smaller, but they are the size of, of a smaller car. But you picture that coming down here and just tearing apart this gabion wall coming down. So again, you can see some of that deposition and sediment coming around the structures, deposited on the structure and below the structure. But really, for the most part, really impressively holding intact a lot of these sites. As you go to point 22, you can start seeing some of this head cutting downstream of the road as well as uphill of the road, starting to lose about 1/3 of the road in this section here, again, down timbers. One thing that we'll be interested when we get to go up and do a ground truthing field trip is as this head cuts back around these structures, it can expose more of the water line. So the water line is approximately in the center line of the road. So something to keep in mind as you look at these pictures, that the water line could be potentially exposed now or very closely exposed to some of these images as you look at them coming through here. But as of September 7th, and then thus trips by water services up, we have 2 known breaks in the water line that will show, I believe it's in the next slide and the last slide. I apologize, it's 2 more slides after this one. So at point 7, this one when we were flying the drone mission, we actually thought the road went down here to the bottom left of this image, but it actually attenuates back into the trees. But it's really hard to see where the existing road was prior to all the sedimentation across the road. As you can see again, anchored structure starting to cut on both sides of the structure because this wasn't designed for more of the forest flooding. It was designed for the post-Schultz fire mitigation work. And again, starting to cut in here, water line can no doubt be, very close to that exposed point there as well. And then again, just showing, as you get these really sharp points of inflection along the road, we have about 1/3 of the road missing here and probably closer to half the road missing here. So as this continues to erode back, we're likely, we need to be able to come up with designs. And at this point, with a 30% design without going up there, Jacobs has a really good idea of conceptual designs in these areas, and with this drone imagery, they're able to come up with some plans moving forward that get to be finalized once we have boots on the ground up there. And then point 32, this one is on Schultz Pass Road. And this, as the arrow points out on that slide, that is now broken, this water line. So there's 2 points, point I on the next slide, and then point 32 where the water line is known to be broken, at least as of late September of last year. This picture here, this is the corrugated metal pipe, or the CMP, that travels under the road to pass drainage from above the road down into Schultz Creek. There should be about 5 feet of cover on that pipe. So as you can tell here, and for scale, a lot of that sedimentation and road is now gone. Here's a picture, a little step back a little further. You can see the water line exposed here. And then this, just to note that this road is impassable. So the only way that we've been able to access Waterline Road in Interbasin has been through the Forest Service Eldon Spring Road by Doney Park, or going up through Lockett Meadow as well. So we have no access from the south at this point to get up from that north filtration plant up to Schultz Pass Road or Waterline Road. And those pictures are 12th of December, so a little earlier than the drone mission on the 7th, but there's so much data to collect that you can't go to all the places on one trip, so you have to stagger the trips to focus on different areas to collect data. And then the last one is point I. For scale, this is me in the yellow circle. This is about a 30-foot incised ravine. And this is what I was saying, if we didn't have those structures from the previous work, a lot of those drainages would look probably similar to this. There's a lot of variables in calculating that, obviously watershed size, vertical relief, things like that, but likely they would look very similar to this scenario. This is a close-up. This is not down debris here. This is actually the pipeline. This is the break. I want to point out that this water pouring out, like Brian had mentioned, is that gravity-fed spring box collected, surface water, collected water. Once we knew the system was compromised, the wells were turned off. So that is not well water coming out of those pipes. That's just the beautiful free water coming down. So again, just some pictures below of the break in the water line, the incision of that canyon. This is going to be a critical point to get in, most likely from the north, from Lockett Meadow. And that's shown on the north end of the map as well. So one question I get asked a lot by staff and those I run into when they find out we've done missions up there is, what does the waterline road that we love and adore look like? A lot of people have seen horrific pictures of the burn, mainly from A to just after G. It looks like the waterline road that we love and adore. So this picture on the left was taken during our summer missions, and this picture on the right was taken during a survey grade mission of the well sites in Interbasin in the second week of October. So fear not, it's still a beautiful hike from a little after G back up towards Interbasin. This picture here on the bottom left is taken around point H, and then these other three are taken around point I. So I want to point out that fire is natural in these ecosystems. It's a lot of fire-adapted species. Aspen is a pioneer species, and they're coming back, and some of them are already 30 inches tall. So there's a lot of really wonderful aspen regeneration up there, which is a wonderful thing to see. They're coming back very robustly, and I wanted to share that because that's exciting. And then last picture says 1,000 words, and I just love to share this picture because it has a lot to say, but a wildfire typically doesn't burn an entire landscape. There's green pockets throughout the fire. Those are typically referred to as biological legacies. They typically act as a seed source. It's hard to see in this picture, but there's spruce fir that survived up here, lodgepole spruce fir up here as well that can act as that seed bank to help kick off the rejuvenation of the forest, the regeneration of the forest. These aspen stands are really neat. Commonly, aspen can act almost as like asbestos in wildfires. And as you can see here, the inner core of the stands were not burned. They survived at the cost of the outer trees of the stand. So wanted to share that. That's just a really neat picture. Again, just north of point I for that picture. And then I will turn it back to Stacy for a little bit of funding.
Before we talk about how we're going to pay for it, which is always important, right? So I was, in 2010, after the Schultz fire, I was actually the disaster recovery manager at that time. I actually was involved heavily with getting this pipeline fixed back in 2010. and that was with the state DEMA, and it was based on a declaration after the fire and subsequent flooding. And there was a lot of work, a lot of partnerships that happened with the Forest Service, with the design build team, with city staff, and it took 2 years to get us back to getting this critical water source. So I think we talk about it, but it's our peak summer flow. It's coming out of the interbasins. It's great water. That's why the emergency procurement part of this is that we really need to get this water line back online for our residents, for our health and safety of our community, and to get it back. I know it's 12 years later and feel like it's been there, done this, doing it again, but that's okay. But I can't express enough on the partnership with the Forest Service and everybody. Back in 2010, the Schultz Fire, it actually won a state award and it won a national award. We went to Toronto, Canada. I went with Hunter and Jacobs and accepted an award. There's awards out in the case out there, but the work that was done in 2010 was exceptional, and it's nice to have the same team back that we can get back in here and get this done. So, and I know the Forest Service, Brian talked about them dipping out of it. When we had the pipeline fire, I got a call, we need water, called Brian. They were dipping out of it. We were working with the Forest Service to help our community and save us from that fire, and then eventually the subsequent flooding. So, so with that a little bit, Arizona Department of Emergency Management and Military Affairs, they were here after the pipeline fire and the flooding. We declared a disaster, as you all know. And those state declarations, they provided numbers. We get declaration numbers. And Miranda, Councilmember Sweet, you're very familiar with this. You were part of our policy group and our meetings during that time. And when we had to declare, and we have 3 different declarations on this, and it's just based on the weather and the flooding events on how they do that. But what DEMA will do will they step in. We declared they will fund this project 75%, 25% match to the city. So that's in place now. But with House Bill 2001, they created a post-fire bill, and DFFM has also been helping and funding. So I'm working right now with the county and with DFFM to get this funded 100%. So I have a request into them. They've asked for some more detailed questions, but the hope is that we'll get this funded at 100%. And that is for pre-disaster restoration. That's to go back in and repair it as it is in kind today. You saw some pictures from David that were ugly, that look like they need more work than just putting it back right like it was. And so what we've done is I'm working with Ed Shank and his staff. We submitted a hazard mitigation grant. After what happens is the state also opens up, after the fire and subsequent flooding, they open up a hazard mitigation post-fire grant. It's only available to Coconino County and to Yavapai. And that opens up another source of funding that comes in place. And what that is for improved long-term work. So we got a lot of pots of money kind of working together to get this done. So we've got DEMA, we've got DFFM for that repair and restoration, and then we have a grant application submitted to get improved work so that we know we need to fix the road so this doesn't happen again. We need to fix some of the water line and realign some things, and so we'll get some funding to do that. So this is where it gets it's a very, very complicated project because you have so many partners, so many funding sources, and in a very high geographic location, difficult location to work. So keep that in mind, and that's kind of why I started with it's a big team. It takes a big team to get this level of project done. So that's kind of where we are on the funding, but we will get this funded with outside sources, and like it was back in 2010, we'll make sure that we get it funded with grant funding and other sources. So with that, we'll go ahead and open up to questions and comments.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you, for the presentation. Do we have questions or comments from council? Yes, Councilmember Harris.
I'm just curious, and I hate to even say this out loud, but if we have another up there, will the work that we're getting ready to do now, is that going to help us?
So another fire?
Yeah. I want to say the word, it's like, I want to put it out there. But
My heart goes beating
Yeah,
faster. So let me, put my emergency management hat on here. So the pipeline fire was its own declaration and the subsequent flooding. If we have another fire, it will become another declaration if it got that bad, and they would fund it under a separate declaration. So if it's a different location. So each is like its own declaration, and each is paid that way. And so DEMA would step in, the state funding, the governor's office would declare, and then we would fund it based on that fire, if whatever that fire is named. So does that answer your question a little bit?
Well, part of it.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
But I was just interested in terms of the design that we're getting ready to do in the project. Will that help? I mean, is there anything that we can do? I mean, fire is just its own thing, I know that, but is there any materials or anything that we can do that would protect that a little bit better?
Yeah, and you know what?
Stacy, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I was just going, that was just where I was going. I was going to invite Berwin with Jacobs Engineering, and I know Hunter Contracting is here, and I think he's a great expert to answer that question. Thank you.
We look at the slides and you see that there are 2 broken pipelines. We're fortunate that we don't have several broken pipes like we had in 2010. We're really fortunate that the previous 32 sites held together and are still protecting on subsequent fires. We are now expanding the area because the fire was larger and it grew to other areas, and now we're putting in the mitigation to protect those drainage ways. And the hope is that those drainage ways will be protected for generations to come. We can't say that it's going to, you can't just put down a lot of money and expect it to be, fixing everything for an unreasonable amount of time. We can put down the kind of money that restores it back to where it was and use the best resources we can to provide protection for the future. And we're only really fixing, we're adding for 2 breaks now, but they weren't broken before. They were well outside the area. All the other areas have sustained quite well, except where we lost half the road. and so we're working with the forest. Please also understand that there's a wildlife boundary that is on the upstream side of that road. And we can't just simply go somewhere else in the forest. We're very restricted as to what our footprint needs to be. And sometimes there's the question, well, why don't we just put in pipes and not put in all these big structures? Well, as a result of these fires, the debris is so big that if we were to have put pipes in, they would have filled up with silt and debris and dead trees, and then they're clogged, and then there's a dam breakage. And that causes for even more damage downstream. So these are the best means that we have for the sites that we have, and we're very fortunate that they're holding up quite well. That all we have to do is in some places is repairs.
Councilmember Harris, I think one point to add here, as you can see on the map, there really isn't a whole lot of forest left to burn on the east side of the peaks. And the bulk of the waterline road does transect the east side of the peak. So I would willing to conjecture here that the greatest impact left would be that A to G point that we showed that's still intact. That would be burning more of the inner basin. But as far as on the east side of the peaks, I just don't think there's enough forest canopy to carry another large wildfire.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I just want to make sure that I'm understanding. So the DEMA grant is a 75-25.
So DEMA, yes, after you declare, DEMA provides through the public assistance program, through DEMA, they have 2 programs, an individual assistance and a public assistance. Public assistance is for public infrastructure, and that is 75-25. So that is in place now with the declaration. And then DFFM through House Bill 2001 opened up a post-fire House bill. So it's all state, it's all coming through the state. And they also have funding for post-fire. And so the state, DFFM and DEMA are working together and deciding, you know, what's the best funding source. And right now they're kind of directing us to use DFFM money because it's 100%, no match, and to go to that source first. So, and what they'll do is, what they're saying is, you go to DFFM first under the state, and then us second. And so DEMA public assistance funding would be a second source. So I'm trying to get away from paying for a match, right? Which is always good. So that's what I'm doing with the state, is trying to work first with DFFM.
So if we use all of that money and then need to go to DEMA, we will have to come up with 25%.
If we had to go that direction, yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, but here's the other interesting piece.
But wait,
Talking
there's
about
more.
funding, there's more. Because if the state said no, go through the public assistance program at 75-25, then I can go back to DFFM and get the match from them.
Oh.
So ultimately, my goal is to get 100% of this funded.
Great.
That would be good. Yay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I think my other comment, and I'm sorry I'm taking just one more second, is that when David and Berwin and they were talking about it, the constructability of this line is really, really difficult. So we've, in the past, I think we paid almost little over 5 million, 6 million in 2010. And it, you know, we don't know what it's going to be today until we get that 30% probable cost. And it's a different situation, but the constructability of this project is very difficult.
Make it rain, Stacy. And if it doesn't work, we always know we can use horses.
Well, that's half of our problem, because if you notice, the road is so narrow, we have to drive equipment for literally miles in one direction and then back up in the other direction until we can find a place to turn the equipment around. And then we're also restricted on the size of the equipment that we can use. We have to use smaller dump trucks and smaller equipment because it has to stay on that small bench. The number of restrictions on this kind of a project is just overwhelming. It looks like the donkeys, you know, they had the right idea the first time. But fortunately, we're allowed to use good equipment and work with the forest, and allowing us the ability to bring the right kind of equipment through here and get our job done as efficiently as possible.
And then in 2010, and I know that Nick mentioned it, but we do have the spotted owls. And so we do have to work around them. They will be there with us. And so we'll work around that in those packs. And the Forest Service has been great, and their wildlife specialists and people have been great to work with us on that part of it. So,
thank you. All right. That seems like we don't have any other questions, so thank you very much, all of you, for the great presentation. Very thorough, and I really appreciated the background as well.
Great. Thank you very much.
We have had a request for a short break, so we are going to take a 10-minute break and be back here at 5:19. You're welcome. All right, we're in the home stretch, and we are going to be talking about item number 10, 2023 updates to the Coconino National Forest, Flagstaff Ranger District, camping and campfire restrictions. So thank you. Hello.
Hello. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council. My name is Paulo Trogi. I'm the Wildland Fire Battalion Chief within Wildland Fire Management for the Flagstaff Fire Department. I am not presenting tonight, but I'm just going to take some time to introduce our friends and colleagues from the Coconino National Forest. So as we're all kind of getting set here, as I'm sure you're aware, the Flagstaff Ranger District is proposing some changes to their camping and campfire restrictions. One of the things that we're really excited about as a fire department and a partnering agency is one of the many complex factors that they took into account is public feedback with that from our citizens of the city of Flagstaff and constituents. So that's something that we think is great. And presenting from the Coconino National Forest, I'll go ahead and introduce everybody. To apply a little bit of context just to who the four gentlemen are that are here to present tonight, I'll offer up some comparables within our city staff about like what their day jobs might relate to. And they obviously won't be super accurate, but it'll just kind of give everybody an idea of who they are. So we have Matt McGrath, District Ranger from the Flagstaff Ranger District. Nick Musto is his Deputy District Ranger, Flagstaff Ranger District. So Matt and Nick would be comparable to like a Deputy City Manager within our organization. And then True Brown is the Acting Deputy Fire Staff for the entire Coconino National Forest. That would be comparable to one of our Deputy Fire Chiefs. And then Andy Patterson is here. He's the Acting District FMO for the Flagstaff Fire District, which is basically everything, I think, above the rim for the most part. So Andy and I would be peers. We would have like responsibilities and obligations. So just to provide a little bit of a backstory, City Fire Staff, myself, Captain Neil Chapman, who handles our forest health side of wildland fire management, Deputy Chief Jerry Bills, and Chief Gaylord, we were presented this proposal in early December, and we immediately nodded our heads and got kind of paralleled with them and in agreement, and it's something that we're excited about. We think it makes a lot of sense. The reason we feel that way, this proposal builds on a history of interagency cooperation. So it's not starting from square one, and this is just, I'm getting a little subjective here. These are some of my opinions. But we felt that there was a lot of strength in where they were moving. It again, left some room for public feedback. It speaks to the realities we all deal with of living in a fire-dependent ecosystem and a city that's always going to be dealing with fire. We're always going to be receiving wildland fire in one way or another. And it fully aligns with all of our priorities within wildland fire management, especially forest health watersheds and some of our operations. One of the things that we're hyper-focused on coming into 2023 is continuing to build on what we've done over the last 25 years and build a safe and healthy community that can receive natural and man-made wildfire without it necessarily being catastrophic, right? So what we mean by catastrophic is tunnel, pipeline, flame lengths exceeding 100 feet, running right uphill. Wildland fire, that's what we would classify as bad fire. On the other end of that, we have what we would call good fire, which moves low and slow through the ecosystem as attended along the ground in the mid-story of the ponderosa pine and some of the other native species. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about good versus bad fire. I think it's important to mention that the proposal that the four gentlemen are giving this evening does not reflect any changes to city fire restrictions. We still have our same stage 1, 2, and 3, which we will move through in unison with all of our Northern Arizona partners as we come into the Southwest fire season, which typically, depending on precip, winter and spring, late April, early May, we all start to gather up every Monday afternoon at 1 o'clock, and we have our restrictions call, where we go through science-based decision-making, indices, and we move in and out of restrictions, typically in unison, shoulder to shoulder. So though we are not proposing any changes to what we're doing, the impacts of what they're presenting will just be that conversation that we're going to have as we move through fire season. So with that, I'll go ahead and exit stage left and let the Coconino take over. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul. Good evening, Council, Mayor, Vice Mayor. My name is Matt McGrath. I'm the District Ranger for the Flagstaff Ranger District here on the Coconino National Forest. This is not surprisingly my first opportunity to talk to the new council, so very nice to meet you. I know several of you from the past few years, but it's great to be here and appreciate the time and the opportunity to talk to you about our camping and campfire restrictions. I do want to start, since relatively new, some new council members, and highlight the incredibly strong partnership that we have with the city of Flagstaff and let you know how much we value that. I think you've heard a lot about that already from some of the other presentations about the amount of work that we do together. Paul talked about the wildland fire piece, but you heard it in some of the flood mitigation work that we're doing. The city has supported us during active fire suppression with bucket drops, which were really incredibly helpful during the pipeline fire. So we really appreciate the partnership with the city and look forward to continuing that. I want to talk to you tonight about our camping and campfire restrictions, which we have had for quite a long time outside the city of Flagstaff. In addition to, so we have permanent restrictions and seasonal restrictions. I want to talk to you about both of those and some changes that we're proposing to make going forward. On the map on the screen right there is very small and hard to see, and it's not something you need to study, but just to give you an idea, any of those areas that have red lines on them are areas that currently have permanent fire restrictions. So we already have a very large area surrounding the city, which you would consider stage 2 restrictions, where campfires are never allowed. So what we'll be looking at is expanding that a little bit, and I'll dig a little bit more into those details. But I want to let you know that we've had these restrictions. I will acknowledge that both of our probably human-caused fires last year started in areas that have permanent fire restrictions. So it goes to show you that there is, of course, the human element, and some people are just going to do things that they ought not do. And so a lot of this people management is trying to reduce the opportunity for those people to do those things. So our objective, all the work that we do on the Flagstaff Ranger District is basically to reduce the potential for human-caused fire, as Paul was talking, catastrophic human-caused fire that affects the peaks. There's 3 ways that we work on that. We do a lot of mechanical treatment in the area surrounding the peaks. We'll be looking at about 14,000 acres of active forest restoration work or timber offering this year. That won't all get cut in 2023, probably 24, 25, 26. And then we'll be offering another 14,000 acres the year after that. And most of those acres are in the upper Rio drainage, which is on the west side of the San Francisco peaks, one of the areas that has not burned, but is probably at some of the greatest risk of any of the acres that we have. That takes a few years for that work to happen. After that, usually we go through with prescribed fire. Occasionally, we do have prescribed fire in areas where we have not previously thinned. However, that is very risky. Any prescribed fire is risky business, but particularly in those areas that are already overgrown. So usually we have some sort of commercial or hand thinning, go through a couple of years later with prescribed fire, and then our goal is to try to basically adopt the natural fire regime, 5, 7, 10-year fire regime for a lot of these areas. We cannot do that with how overgrown the forests have become over the last 50, 70, 100 years. So it's kind of a few different pieces there. And then, of course, the third thing that we do all the time, and I'm sure I don't need to tell elected officials what it's like to try to manage a big group of people, but people management. And that's what we're talking about. We get into the fire restrictions, what people can and cannot do, and also get into the enforcement piece there as well. Madam Mayor, I should have mentioned, whatever pleases the council. If you have questions as I'm going through, feel free to interrupt me, or at the end, whatever works best for you. Just to give you a little information on fire history on the Coconino National Forest, our folks keep really good stats, and this is the last 52 years of the fires that we have had on the National Forest. The blue line are human-caused starts, and the orange line are lightning starts. You'll see both of those are trending down over time. The lightning, haven't really dug into this with the National Weather Service yet, but we believe that is because the monsoon has changed and become more mild over the years, less lightning strikes. And then the human-caused fires are fewer and fewer every year, trending down. Over the last 20 years, they're basically about the same. In 2022, we had the fewest human-caused fires ever on the Coconino National Forest, but 2 of those fires were at the worst time of the year in the worst conditions. We had the tunnel fire and the pipeline fire. So it's not always a matter of the volume of fires, but where and when they start. But have made really good progress, and a lot of that is due to the enforcement and due to having a lot of folks out in the forest monitoring this and also our partnership with like Arizona Game and Fish Department and Coconino County, who help us enforce these things. There's a lot of, especially last year during the fires, there was a lot of questions about fire restrictions and how we go. As I mentioned, we have areas surrounding the city that have permanent fire restrictions. It's illegal to have a campfire adjacent to the city limits year-round. Even right now, when there's snow on the ground, it's still illegal. I can't camp or can't have a fire right next to the city. But then for the rest of the forest, we have stage 1, 2, and 3 fire restrictions, and we base those on a variety of scientific indices, which you see here before you. Some of them are pretty obvious. You know what the maximum temperature and the relative humidity is. And then we have some others, energy release component, burning index, which are kind of, they compile a variety of information, basically tell us if we have a fire, how bad is it going to, how hot is it going to burn, how likely is it to spread. Ignition component, if we have a spark, if we have a cigarette, how likely is that flick of a cigarette to cause a wildfire, or how likely is it to just fizzle out and not be a big deal. And then we also have fuel moisture. So we're measuring those constantly. And then as we get into the season, Paul mentioned, every Monday we get together with all of our partners and have a conversation about these are where we are statistically for all of these. So it's basically based on the indices and science, but then there's some professional judgment and partner cooperator considerations factored in there. A couple of those things when I say, because everybody wants to understand how they happen. So we have these indices, but then we have experts who've been here for a long time and know a lot about how fire behaves. And we factor in some other things like the weather forecast or the extended outlook. If, say, it's July 5th and we're tilting it to maybe stage 2 restrictions, but the Weather Service says monsoon's coming in 4 days, that's the kind of thing where we might say, well, let's not mobilize everyone to go into restrictions when there's a 98% chance that we're going to get 3 inches of rain this weekend. So that's how we factor in some of those other things. You hear us talk about resource availability a lot. That's how many firefighters do we have? How many firefighters do our partners have available to help us? Our fire season is different than a lot of the fire seasons in the United States. So in May, when we really start to get dry and hot, it's not fire season yet in Montana or Idaho or most of Washington or Oregon. And we have a lot of those folks down here on what we call severity assistance. And they're down here helping us to basically just staging here in case something happens. Then when our fire season is over, it kind of flips. They go home. And our folks, when we don't really have the threat of fire anymore in August, September, October, our folks go up and help them. So how many resources we have availability. Resistance to control is basically if fires are happening, are we able to catch them? And oftentimes we can. Last year, both of our significant fires were during red flag events. And I'll be honest with you, it doesn't matter if we have 6,000 firefighters, if the winds are 50 miles an hour and a fire starts, we're just going to get out of the way. There's nothing you can do about that. We can, and in those instances, oftentimes we can't even fly because it's too windy. So those red flag events are just something that we just have to try to manage, and that's where this people component comes in. And then there's visitor use and holidays. Memorial Day weekend, we know it's going to be even busier than usual. July 4th weekend, we know it's going to be even busier than usual. So factoring in, if we're getting close to meeting restrictions and we say there's going to be an extra 5,000 people camped out on the forest this weekend, and we can't possibly babysit all of them and make sure they're not having a fire, that's when we might start to, or having a fire safely, that's when we might bump into another level of restrictions. There's a lot of words on this slide, so I apologize for that, but just want to give you an overview. We have 3 phases of restrictions. So as I said, around the city, can never have a campfire, nor can you go camping. But then we have additional seasonal restrictions in other areas of the forest. Stage 1 restrictions is when campfires are prohibited out on the forest. If you're dispersed camping by yourself somewhere, you cannot have a fire, but if you're in a picnic area, you can still have a fire to cook a cheeseburger. Or also if you're in a campground, a developed site, that's because those sites are developed. They have usually a metal fire ring, and there's a lot of ground cleared around that area, which is why we allow campfires in those spots when we don't out on the forest. Stage 2 restrictions is when it's getting warmer and drier, and that's when there are no fires permitted anywhere on the forest. In addition to that, no chainsaws are allowed between 9 a.m. and 8 p.m. No chainsaws are allowed. No internal combustion engines are allowed. Our commercial timber operations are not permitted. If we have a youth corps out there trying to use a chainsaw to clear a trail, they can't do that between 9 and 8. Because of the stage 2 restrictions. Then when we get into something we call stage 3, that you've seen before, either a full forest closure or specific area closures, which we have tried to move to a little bit more over the past few years because the Flagstaff Ranger District and the Coconino National Forest is pretty big, almost 2 million acres. Not every acre is as sensitive as the others. No acres are more sensitive than, say, the peaks or the area around Kachina and Mountain Air. So we focus on closing some smaller areas rather than the whole forest, and that is basically we have finite resources. We can focus better on trying to protect, for lack of a better term, protect those really important areas and not focus so much on those other areas. A little bit about our restrictions history, because it's highly variable, and I just want to share that with you. So this is for the last 22 years. We've had 4 years where we've never had any fire restrictions. My first year here was 2019. I got here almost 4 years ago to the day. My first, I think it was Snowmageddon was like my second month, February. We were calling it Snowmageddon. And we never went into fire restrictions that whole year. I thought, man, this is great. I love it here. This is fantastic. We don't have any worries. We did have the museum fire in spite of that, not having restrictions, but that doesn't mean that we won't have a fire, and that was almost 2,000 acres. But 4 times we've had no fire restrictions at all. Stage 1, which is kind of that first stage that we go into, and again, that's when you can have a campfire in a developed area, but you can't have one out on the general forest out by yourself. In general, around mid to late May is when we usually wind up in that stage 1 restrictions, and it usually goes for about a month into the middle of June. It's around that time usually that we go into stage 2. Obviously, May, June gets warmer, it gets drier. We move through those restrictions, those indices, and then also visitor use starts to pick up as the valley gets hotter and hotter. We get more and more people coming up here to visit us and stay with us. And so usually it's about a month of stage 2 restrictions. And then that stage 3, which is either a full forest closure or area closures. We've done that 6 times over the last 22 years. And those are even pretty variable in the length, 49 days once, 23 days once, 10 days once. Again, 2018, we had a forest closure. 2019, we had no restrictions at all. And then we had forest closures again the last 2 years. So it's just a lot of it, or all of it basically, is dependent on our winter, essentially. Obviously, we have the long-term drought, but exactly what we get in the winter really dictates a lot of, and also into the spring. So that's why everybody, at least on my end, and folks were paying attention. You know, when we hear about La Nina this year, we're a little bit concerned because really last thing we need is a mild and dry winter. But so far, it's been working out pretty well for us, and we've been able to get a lot of prescribed pile burning done in the last couple of months. Last year, we had a great December in terms of snow, and then it basically turned off. So I'm trying not to get overexcited as we see, 2 to 3 inches in the forecast tonight, 6 inches this weekend, but it all adds up, and it's all a good thing. And as I was talking to Stacy at the break, and she said, we need to get up and put some eyes on the Waterline Road. Can't do that with the snow. I said, I'm sorry, Stacy, but I'm still rooting for snow because that really is one of the biggest things that dictates our season. This chart is not as complicated as it looks, but it's basically our restrictions history for the last 22 years. So the year 2000 is on top, and 2022, this year, is on the bottom. And so where you see a red bar, that's stage 1 restrictions, yellow is stage 2, and red is stage 3. And the exact dates aren't important, the exact how long it's not important, but just to give you an idea, there's some red bars and then there's nothing. So we have restrictions, then we don't have restrictions. Those red triangles on there are most of our significant fire starts. And so you see how they don't always connect very well to our fire restrictions. The Schultz fire in 2010 was outside of restrictions. The Tunnel fire on April 21st was certainly outside of fire restrictions. But just to share that with you, and the stage 2, as we average that out, is generally about 28 days, so about a month of those stage 2 higher level restrictions. And then either we wind up from there going into monsoons, or sometimes we go into a stage 3 forest closure. So what I want to talk to you about right now is this is kind of a zoomed up version of that first map. And our district is kind of oriented. It's it's portrait sized, and this is a landscape presentation. So I split the map into 2. But this is the north part of the district, north of the freeway. And so where you see kind of a crosshatch pattern there, that's the area that's permanently closed to camping and campfires. And then where you see vertical lines, that area is closed to campfires only, and camping is allowed. So the example, that was the pipeline fire started in that area where camping was allowed. Campfires were prohibited, but somebody couldn't help themselves is one of the issues that we deal with. So these are the current restrictions that we have there. We're proposing a couple of changes in this area. So first of all, that large area that is currently where camping is allowed, but camping is allowed, but campfires are prohibited. We propose to close that area to camping entirely year-round. And this is one of those things where we try to balance public access versus protecting the community. And a lot of folks go in there and have a great time, but some people just can't help themselves, and this is one of the most sensitive areas. It's where the pipeline fire started. So essentially here, the pipeline fire could start 2 miles to the west, and it would basically just, we had tunnel, then pipeline, and we would have a third fire adjacent to it. So this is to keep folks out of there. One of the things that we have a lot of trouble with is catching people when they have a fire, because they do it, a lot of times at night when we're not out there always at 10 o'clock at night. I don't want my people out there at 10 o'clock at night. They're not trained law enforcement. It's not safe for them. But if we know, it's easier for us to keep people from camping. So if at 4 o'clock we see somebody setting up there to camp, or if we're there the next morning at 8 a.m. and we see that they were camping, it's easier for us to get them out of that area rather than just let them go and come back a couple days later where they may or may not have had that fire. There's also an area over by the cinders where camping and campfires have gotten a lot more popular right there adjacent to some folks' homes. That's an area that probably should have been closed to camping and campfires when we first had this order. But the residents out there, we hear from them pretty regularly. There are people basically camping on the other side of their fence line and having fires all of the time. So looking at adding that to the area, there's plenty of room immediately adjacent to that out in the cinders where folks can camp, and where frankly, the threat of a fire getting out of control out in the cinders is very unlikely, because, it's the cinders. So then another kind of the bigger change that I want to share with you that is something brand new for us is this. So this is a pretty large area, but what we are proposing is that during stage 2 restrictions, which is that time normally when there are no fires allowed anywhere on the forest, basically the entirety of the peaks, from Highway 89 to Highway 180, north of Buffalo Park, up to the 418 road, which is a road that basically just goes across the north side of the peaks. That area would be closed to motorized use. So folks would still be able to hike, bike, ride their horse, walk their dogs adjacent to their homes. But the fact of the matter is, I don't know the exact number, but I'm guessing about 98% of our fires start within a stone's throw of a motor vehicle. And so by keeping motor vehicles out of this area during that time of increased fire danger, we feel it gives us a much better opportunity to prevent a catastrophic fire from starting in this area on the west side of the peaks. This is new for us. Snowball Road is that little yellow squiggly line on there. Snowball Road would stay open. Snowball would be allowed to operate as they normally do. And folks would be able to access the Humphreys Trailhead, the Kachina Trailhead. All of our trailheads adjacent to the highways would remain open. So we're looking at this as a very minor reduction of access, and that stage 2 restrictions is generally for about a month a year. So normally, in a normal year, even though I spent a lot of time earlier telling you there's no normal, there could be restrictions and then nothing and then more restrictions. During a normal year, from about mid-June to early July, this area would be closed to motor vehicles. And that is, I won't say it's easy for us to enforce, but closing gates and keeping people off of roads is easier than us trying to patrol every road and find every illegal camper or illegal campfire. There are some other concerns associated with this proposal. And actually, going back just to the year-round no camping area, there's a road on here. It is called this road right here. It's called the 164B or 164 Bravo, which is probably our most popular non-recreational camping site on the district. And when I say non-recreational camping, that's basically people living on the forest, which is never legal, but we all know happens quite a bit here in town. So if we close that road to camping, those folks are not going to find an apartment just because we close that road to camping, right? And so how this impacts those people and where they go is something that we'll have to evaluate as we work our way through this. most likely folks who are doing that, and I'm not encouraging it, but I'm just acknowledging that it's going to happen and we're not going to fix it this week, would probably cross over on the other side of the 180. That buys us something, and that gives us a highway. If we do have a fire start, that gives us a highway and more room for our fire folks to have a chance to suppress a fire before it gets to the peaks. But do want to acknowledge that that is something that will be a change and have some impact to the community. I've had a chance to talk with some folks from the city and the county and some of the social services organizations as we try to, it's connected to this proposal, but it's also just a long-term problem that we all share in this community. Is we've got a lot of unsheltered folks living on the forest because they don't really have many other options at this point. So how can we be understandable and respectful of them as humans trying to get by while also trying to protect the peaks in the community from catastrophic fire? There's some other, just down in the bottom right, some other access needs. If we do close this area to motorized use, we will still have probably needs to get in there for some flood mitigation work that we've talked about. The Arizona Snowbowl is up there. The Arizona Trail goes through. Arizona Nordic Village. So we'd find ways for these folks to continue to operate as usual, but just would have this area closed to motorized use. This may probably lead to some of the questions, but before we do that, I will just cover the southern part of the district. And so, again, the area surrounding Kachina and Mountain Air are closed to camping and campfires year-round in the area adjacent to Walnut Canyon. Looking at increasing the year-round camping campfire prohibition just a little bit over off of Forest Road 303, over by Walnut Canyon. That's another area where a lot of folks have started having either long-term camps or living over there and having campfires adjacent to people's homes. And so really the whole point of the year-round closure is to keep people from having fires right outside your fence line or setting up a home right there. So looking at adding that to the year-round. And then also, during those stage 2, those increased times of fire danger, the area Pump House Wash, which is Forest Road 237 from Kachina Village over to Highway 89A, and kind of that Walnut Canyon area south of Walnut Canyon and adjacent to Lake Mary would also become non-motorized areas for that stage 2 time. Those areas, those polygons that you see on the map, and the line's not perfect. I literally click that map on there like in PowerPoint. So we've got a better map by professionals. So don't say, oh, I see this road is in there. We're finessing the boundaries, or we have released a more accurate map to the public just before I came out today. Looking at closing those areas, again, to motorized use, folks would still be able to hike, bike, ride their horse in there. And again, these are the areas where if we had a fire start during times of increased fire danger, Pump House Wash just feeds right into Kachina Village, Mountain Air, and then kind of towards the airport, south side, and into the community. These polygons that you see are basically those areas that we have used for stage 3 forest closure when we tried to pivot to the more specific areas instead of the entire forest. These polygons you see are those areas. They've been identified for years as areas that are more sensitive and increased fire danger. So those are the areas that we're looking at for those stage 2 closures. So overall, some minor temporary reductions in motorized access, but not closing any acres, not trying to keep people off their public land. I spent my career in the Rec and Trails program. My whole life is trying to get people out onto public land, so I'm not trying to keep them off. But recognizing that while most people are very good, a lot of our fires start adjacent to a motor vehicle. So looking at reducing the potential for motor vehicles, and to say, not to say that all of them do. We have had folks inexplicably riding a mountain bike and smoking a cigarette at the same time and flicking a cigarette off into the bushes. It happens. So I don't want to say that just keeping cars out is going to do everything. But this is kind of one of the big change that we think does the most to balance things out. So with that is what I wanted to share with you. It was a lot of information, I know, but if you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to take them. I will say, just in terms of public engagement, as I said, we met with the fire department late last year, Arizona Game and Fish, Coconino County. I had a chance to visit with Senator Kelly's office. And so I've had some of those conversations. Press release and some Facebook information went out around 4 o'clock today with those better maps, not my little clicks on a PowerPoint, better maps, and so that's out there today. So looking to show up, if there's a neighborhood community meeting that you think we should be at, please let us know. We're happy to go there and talk more with folks about this. But we'll be looking at sharing this. And this is our proposal. We think it's pretty solid. We think it meets the needs and kind of strikes that right balance. But want to hear from folks if they think there's something that we missed, or if some folks will say this is too much. I think many folks might say it's not enough. But we want to hear from folks what they think about this. And this is something we'll be looking to implement starting this spring. So the year-round no camping we'll implement March, April when we open up our gates, when the snow melts and the roads dry out. And then I'm an eternal optimist. I'm going to say maybe we won't have stage 2 fire restrictions this year, and we won't have to implement these changes just yet. That's my ideal situation. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We don't know. But looking at implementing whatever we decide to do, implementing it this year.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions or comments from council? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. This is a big deal. This strikes me as a really, really big deal.
In a good way.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean.
Thank you, Mayor.
I just have some popcorn thoughts and questions for you. Really just reacting to this, and I think there's going to be a lot of people around town who have some complicated relationship with all of this. I think it's necessary, and ultimately I'm supportive of it. Trying to bear in mind that these are temporary restrictions, right? And it's done for public safety and for protection of our infrastructure and our public lands. I'm glad you brought up, at least you gave voice to the concerns of our unsheltered population around Flagstaff. I would like to know that they're being heard from in this process. So eventually I'm going to ask you to speak a little bit more towards your plans for public outreach. And I know you're coming here asking us for suggestions and ideas for how to do that. One of my suggestions would be a very robust public outreach and listening campaign with our area unsheltered, specifically the types of folks who will utilize our forest lands during different times of the year, who probably aren't in town right now, right? Mm-hmm. They will come and go. And so that sort of outreach will have to be ongoing and have a temporal element to it. Let's see. I just want to mention, I'm really excited about this, actually. Every year, we get constituents coming to us asking us to close the forest. There's lots of jurisdictional confusion around that, and there's a lot of ways in which we feel we'd love to be helpful, but we can't. There is a sense of a lack of control about that, and this is something that needs to be done with sensitivity towards the science, with a discipline towards thinking about the multiple uses that our public lands have. And so I don't think a municipal council body would be the right organization to be making decisions like this. I'm glad it's in the hands of scientists and practitioners of your disciplines. So this is the sort of wish list that I would come to you with. And we don't have a magic wand, but I'm left with the impression we're able to wave a magic wand right now. And so this is really nice. It shows me that your agencies are being responsive at the local level here to what constituents are looking for and concerned about. But there are two sides to every coin, and there's going to be a population that is already marginalized and hard off in a lot of different ways, who are going to be impacted disproportionately by some of these decisions. I would ask that your agencies continue to have a special sensitivity to that, and just in terms of making sure there's an alternative that they can utilize or take advantage of, making sure that there are resources that we could lend even in terms of just suggestions of where to go instead. And again, I'm just kind of thinking out loud. I could probably do it for 20 minutes. I don't want to take up everyone's time too much tonight. But these are all important thoughts that are just going through my mind. I do appreciate the added roadlessness nature to a lot of this. I think that's exciting for a variety of reasons. I appreciate you bringing up the Arizona Trail. And, you know, one thing that came up is Snow Bowl and the Nordic Village. I wonder what other for-profit entities are going to have leverage and access in a way that others are going to feel left out of. So those are more things to be thoughtful about. Just please do a really good job of outreach towards the migrant, the transient. I don't know. I don't know what the right terminology is these days, but our camping population. It's really important to make sure that they aren't bullied around in this process. And I'll leave it there. I want to thank you. I think, again, this is a big deal in a good way. There's lots of sensitivities and considerations, and we need to do justice to a lot of different concerns as we consider this. But it's an important step, and I think it's reflective of your agencies listening to the public.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. If I could just address two of those comments very briefly. You know, you had said wave the wand, and I hear that a lot from the public. They call me up and they say, Matt, why don't you close the forest? Like it's waving the wand and it's just going to reduce the danger to zero. And actually what we found is a lot of times when we close the forest, folks who are living on the forest, they don't have anywhere else to go. That's why they're living on the forest. And they go deeper into the forest, maybe to more sensitive areas that we're never going to find them or never find the fire. So there's kind of two sides to that closure. Yes, it does reduce the number of people. It's pretty heavy-handed in terms of restricting access to public lands. And we have found that there are fewer people out there. A lot of times we get phone calls from the public, or our dispatch center does. And I will say, you know, I hear from folks a lot. They say, I didn't see anybody come out, you know, within a half hour. A lot of times it takes us an hour to drive out to some of these places. But we respond to every time they call our dispatch center and say, hey, I saw an illegal campfire. So having the public out there in many ways is a lot more eyes to help us keep the forest safe. In terms of unsheltered folks choosing to live on the forest, or I shouldn't even say choosing, we learned, you know, in 2020 when we first did a forest closure, and I think it was like 3 days notice, and we went out and we mobilized everybody that works for us. We went out and talked to everybody on the forest and said, hey, in 3 days, we're closing the gates. You got to go somewhere. And they're just sort of shrugged. And we didn't have any information to share with them on potential options on what they may choose to do to continue to get by. That's when a lot of folks just went to the Walmart parking lot, which I think Walmart was okay with for like 10 days, and then Walmart got fed up and said, you got to go. So that's what we're trying to have those conversations with our partners to figure out if we get to that point when folks cannot be out on the forest, what opportunities, what services are available to them in the community, either through the city or the county or other partners. And so we have that information that we can share with them. There's a couple of groups that spend a lot of time on the forest. There's people with RVs who just spending their summer out, and this is a great place to be, and they want to stay for weeks. There's people who just come up from the valley and want to stay for a few weeks, and then there's other folks who they're there because they're just trying to get by. And that, I agree with you, they're going to be the toughest group for us to talk to, because we're going to hear from those other people who just want to be able to spend all their time on the forest. They've got satellite dishes on their RVs, and they're going to see this proposal, and they're going to tell me it's terrible because they want a summer in Flagstaff. But how we connect with those people, and if folks have ideas on how we can better connect with those folks out in the forest, I would appreciate them. Thank you.
Don't forget NEU students. I mean, it runs the gamut. The folks who will go out there for the camping limit and then move to another place and take advantage of that again.
Thank you. So we have a comment from Councilmember McCarthy, and then either a comment or a question from Councilmember Harris.
Well, I just want to thank you for the presentation, and I thank Mr. Aslan for his comments and your response. Very good presentation. I think it was very important for us to hear it, and I'm glad that the Forest Service is taking a very rational approach to this issue. I think, as we all know, if we had a fire on the west side of the peaks, that it would be a very big problem, to say the least. So anyway, thank you for coming tonight. It was well worth your time and our time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Councilmember Harris?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate, thank you. But in terms of our unsheltered population who may be living in the forest, I don't think it's fair for us to try and put that on you all to notify them or whatever. So I think encouraging you to do whatever you can, and then to make sure that we as a community have given you the resources that are available, you know, on little cards or pieces of paper or whatever for you to hand out to people if you encounter them. And I think also for those places where we know that perhaps unsheltered people may visit, to make sure that they have the information about the closures and what you're doing. And so all of us have to, you know, do this. So I think it needs to be a little bit of a coordinated effort so that you all are not feeling that you're totally responsible for this, because it's a community issue. It's not just your issue, but that's what, you know, and I think there are lots of organizations and places in town that would be more than willing to have those little information cards or whatever, you know, we decide to come up with to hand to people that, you know, that we may encounter. Okay.
Thank you. I too would like to say thank you so much for this. It was a great presentation, and it's exciting. I'm sure you see on social media, you know, lots of concern expressed different ways about the forest and whether it should be closed or not, and we certainly hear it as well. So I'm glad that we have this extra layer. And then I have a question for the city manager, and that is, how or do we communicate with the Forest Service around where our unsheltered neighbors can go when the forest is closed to automobiles?
I'm not sure that I understood the question, Mayor.
So the past couple of summers when, well, and the example was given when people were parking in the Walmart parking lot. Are we coordinating with the Forest Service at all as we're coming up on a potential close of the forest to vehicles?
Not to my knowledge. I don't know that that coordination is occurring. We certainly could reach out to see what resources are available. You know, I'll add to the discussion, and I think it's a very thoughtful discussion. In many instances, we do not have the benefit of a lot of time in these things. But that's not to say that better communication could not be had and more coordination.
And I would just love to see the city work with our nonprofit partners on a plan, recognizing that it can be, you know, there are different circumstances, but some sort of a plan that we kind of already have in our back pocket for instances like that.
I'm understanding a little bit more now. I do believe that plan exists. I have seen it, where there are places where people can go in emergent situations, and I think the closure of the forest certainly falls into that category. We do have a plan in place. Others can probably speak to it in more detail, but I do know that there is a strategy there. The first part of your question was, what efforts can we do to better coordinate? And I don't have a good answer to that, but I do believe we have a plan.
Could council get a copy of that?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Councilmember Matthews.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to interject that many years ago when I was running the Flagstaff Shelter Services, absolutely, when there was we're going to have to close the forest in 3 or 4 days, we had an emergency meeting of all the nonprofits that serviced the unsheltered, and churches opened up their rooms and stuff, and it was, you know, the community really comes together during that time. If it's a long-term closure, I think it's a good conversation to have to say, what options can we offer people that, aren't just visiting to camp. But I will also point out that there's an interesting phenomenon that there's a part of the unsheltered population that travel a circuit that come here in New Mexico and Oregon, and they make a way around because clearly they're not here right now because of the snow. So if we can just buy them time and give them resources for travel and stuff, I think that that's a great thing to look at and be prepared for, so we're not just scrambling last minute, because I think that we will have forest closures from now to forever, and so we should have a plan, kind of a handshake agreement with the nonprofits and local churches, like what can we do immediately and then what do we do long term. But I do know that it's very well orchestrated, and I've been a part of that in the past, and everybody just comes together and it works very well.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Mayor Daggett, I just want to go back to your question. That was a great question and even better follow-up comments. So I could speak to that a little bit. Neil and myself out of our Office of Wildland Fire Management, we're working closely with Sarah Langley and her folks to develop that plan. We're right in the middle of the pre-planning of that. So as we wrap that up, we'll be sure to get everybody a draft. And to answer your initial question, no, we did not have a plan in place last year. There was a lot of coordination and we made it work. But a lesson learned from that in our after-action reviews were that we needed to firm that up quite a bit. Great. And then just while I'm here, Councilmember Harris, you had a great point about what we call a whole community effort. I didn't mention that. I had that in my notes. But that's something that we're hyper-focused on and working really hard on. Currently recruiting for our community risk reduction specialist, which will work with Firewise and with grants and with public education. So we're going to get that word out, and that's one of the things that we're really focused on going into the winter and spring, is making sure we do a lot of public outreach, education, because we can put all these restrictions in place, we can coordinate, we can have calls, but if the public doesn't understand the basics of caring for their property, in a lot of ways it's all for naught. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think I speak for all of us when I thank you all once again for how professionally and calmly, it may not seem calm to you, but from us when we're panicking in the city limits, just how you have managed some really catastrophic fires, and knowing that you all are out there and have thought it through, have a plan, and are working so well together makes us feel safer. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I'll just say, my friends here with me let me do all the talking because they know I like it. But all four of us live in the city, right? Almost all of us on the forest live here in the city. This is home for us too. So this work is incredibly important and means just as much to us personally as it does professionally. So thank you very much for your time tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, do we have anyone for public participation?
Mayor, we do not.
Okay, moving on to item number 12, informational items, 2 from Mayor, Council, and City Manager, future agenda item requests. I'm going to start over here with Councilmember McCarthy.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I don't really have anything new tonight. I'll leave it at that.
Great, thanks. Councilmember Sweet.
Thank you. There is a Downtown Connection Center Civic Space Visioning Refresh this Thursday, 5:30 to 7 at the Murdoch Center. This will be a unique opportunity to influence a space that will help define the South Side and Central Flagstaff. I really hope to see you all there.
Thank you. Councilmember House.
Thank you. Tomorrow, the 11th, is National Human Trafficking Awareness Day and Wear Blue Day. Wear Blue Day is an invitation to raise community awareness of human trafficking by wearing blue and sharing pictures on social media as part of the Blue campaign in partnership with DHS. So I just encourage community members to consider participating in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Aslan.
I have a couple of fair items, actually. So two fairs I'd like to queue up. Both will be a bit lengthy and involve the public, so I want to get them teed up here. The first one is I would like to officially put forth the idea that we enter a process for renaming Agassiz Peak. I know that we have a youth group, and I was enraptured by the presentation they gave at Indigenous Peoples Day right here in these chambers late last year. And they have presented to the Commission on Diversity Awareness and the Indigenous Commission in recent months. And I spoke with Rose Tohe on our city staff about this question, and she tells me that the youth group is informed of the citizens petition process that can be presented to city leadership and council. And I really encourage them to proceed with that process. It's very important that we see the public is involved in this effort and that it is driven by the community and especially by our youth. But I do want to get this agendized early in our new council term, and I look forward to the conversation and the process that will unfold through that. I hope we can all get behind this, but that will be a conversation, hopefully in short order here, depending on how long the queue is. The other one is not really related, but it will itself undoubtedly involve a public process if it goes forward. And that is that I'm wondering if it's time for the city of Flagstaff to revisit its logo. I don't know if enough members of council will agree with me that this is a conversation worth having and a process worth embarking upon, but I'd like to put it up to the body to decide at their earliest convenience. Thank you.
Councilmember Harris.
Nothing at this time.
Thank you. Councilmember Matthews.
I have nothing at this time.
Thank you. Staff.
Nothing from me.
All right. We're adjourned.
Retention and expansion of our businesses, job creation, library services, and marketing to our visitors to come and appreciate the people and the beauty of Flagstaff.